Hey guys, imagine a tiny strip of land, squeezed between empires like a forgotten sandwich in a fridge full of tyrants, surviving millennia of invasions, exiles, and divine plot twists that make soap operas look tame. This is Israel, where history isn't just written, it's etched in blood, sweat, and a whole lot of why me moments. Buckle up, because we're about to unravel the absurd, painful saga of a people who turned survival into an art form, one ironic catastrophe at a time. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The beginning. Or should I say, the pre-beginning. Because nothing screams epic history like starting with cavemen scratching their heads in the Levant. Picture this. Around 1.5 million years ago, some early hominids stumble into what's now Israel, probably chasing a mammoth or fleeing a bad date. Sites like Ubaidiya near the Sea of Galilee cough up fossils and tools, proving that even back then, this land was a magnet for wanderers. Fast forward to about 600,000 years ago, and you've got Neanderthals and early modern humans cohabiting in caves on Mount Carmel. Talk about awkward roommates. One group's grunting about fire, the other's inventing the first Stone Age drama. The pain of survival? Oh, it's raw here, hunting with sticks, dodging saber-toothed whatever, all while the climate flips like a moody teenager. Ironic, isn't it? This cradle of civilization starts with folks who couldn't even spell civilization. By the 10th millennium BCE, enter the Natufians, semi-sedentary hunter-gatherers who decide, hey, why not stick around? They're building round houses, burying their dead with flair, dog skeletons included, man's best friend, Eternal Edition, and experimenting with wild grains. Sites like Anan and Nahal Oren show these proto-farmers grinding away, literally, with stone tools. The Neolithic Revolution hits around 9000 BCE, and suddenly everyone's planting barley and wheat, domesticating goats, and building Jericho. Yes, that Jericho, with its famous walls that would later tumble like a bad Jenga game. Imagine the absurdity. After eons of nomadic hardship, they settle down, only to invent property disputes and the first "keep off my lawn" signs. Survival's pain, starvation risks turn into famine fears, and those early villages, plagues waiting to happen. But hey, progress, or as I like to call it, trading one nightmare for another. Fast forward to the Bronze Age, around 3300 BCE, and the land's buzzing with Canaanite city-states. These folks are pros at absurdity, building massive walls, trading with Egypt and Mesopotamia, and worshipping a pantheon of gods who make Greek myths look straightforward. El, Baal, Asherah. It's a divine soap opera up there. Cities like Hazor, Megiddo, and Jericho thrive on copper tools, pottery, and the occasional human sacrifice for good measure. The Middle Bronze Age, say 2000 to 1550 BCE, sees urban boom, fortified settlements, palaces, and ramps that scream, "Come at me, invaders." But oh, the irony. All that fortification, and Egypt's Thutmose III still waltzes in around 1457 BCE at the Battle of Megiddo, turning Canaan into a vassal playground. The Amarna letters, those ancient diplomatic wines from the 14th century BCE, paint a picture of city kings begging Pharaoh for help against bandits and rivals. Send troops, or we're doomed, they cry, while the Apiru, possibly Proto-Hebrews, social outcasts raiding from the hills, add to the chaos. Now, enter the biblical heavyweights, or as historians love to debate, the maybe-they-existed patriarchs. Around 2000 to 1700 BCE, if you buy the timeline, Abraham, the OG wanderer, packs up from Ur, or Haran, depending on the edit, and heads to Canaan on God's say-so. "Go to the land I will show you," says the divine voice, which sounds suspiciously like a cosmic prank. Abraham's got it rough. Famine drives him to Egypt, where he pimps out his wife Sarah as his sister to Pharaoh. Survival's pain in full swing, folks. Then there's the nephew Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah going up in flames, brimstone special effects included, and Abraham nearly sacrificing Isaac on Mount Moriah. Ironic twist, the guy promised descendants like stars ends up with family drama that could fill a therapy session. Jacob, his grandson, wrestles an angel, or God, or a bad dream, gets renamed Israel, struggles with God, and fathers 12 tribes. These guys embody the nightmare, endless migration, sibling rivalries, Esau versus Jacob, anyone? And a covenant that's basically suffer now, glory later. Drop a comment. What's your take on Abraham's sister wife scheme? Genius survival tactic or ultimate awkward moment? By the late Bronze Age, around 1500 to 1200 BCE, Egypt's grip tightens under the new kingdom. Pharaohs like Amenhotep III treat Canaan like a backyard garden, extracting tribute while local kings squabble. But then, bam, the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, empires crumble, cities burn, and in rides chaos on a chariot of mystery. Drought, invasions, economic meltdown, pick your poison. The Sea Peoples, including the Peliset, aka Philistines, crashed the party, settling the coast with their fancy pottery and iron weapons. Meanwhile, the Shasu nomads from the south, mentioned in Egyptian texts, might link to early Israelites, with one inscription even nodding to Yahweh, Yahweh's early cameo. The Merneptah stele from 1208 BCE drops the bombshell. Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. First mention of Israel outside the Bible, and it's a victory brag by Pharaoh Merneptah. Absurd, right? A people so insignificant they're boasted about being crushed. Yet here we are, talking about them millennia later. The pain, villages razed, populations displaced. Survival means reinventing yourself amid ruins. Enter the Iron Age, around 1200 to 950 BCE for Iron Eye, where the Israelites truly emerge from the shadows. Forget the biblical conquest fireworks. Archaeology paints a quieter picture. New villages pop up in the central hill country, from Galilee to Judah, unwalled, simple, with 4-room houses, terraced farms, and a notable lack of pig bones. Kosher before it was cool. Population swells from 20,000 to 40,000, mostly indigenous Canaanites mixing with refugees, escaped slaves, and those pesky Apiru. The biblical Exodus, a kernel of truth perhaps, Semitic slaves fleeing Egypt, amplified into epic proportions. Moses, the reluctant leader, part seas, gets commandments on Sinai, and wanders the desert for 40 years because why not drag out the suffering? Golden calf idolatry, manna from heaven, boredom food, and constant grumbling. It's the ultimate survival boot camp. Joshua's conquests, walls of Jericho tumbling. Archaeology says the city was already ruins, so maybe metaphorical trumpets. Ironic, a promised land flowing with milk and honey, but you gotta fight every step. What do you think? Was the Exodus real history or masterful myth? Comment below. By the 11th to 10th century BCE, things get monarchical. Saul, the first king, anointed by Samuel because the people whine for a ruler like everyone else. Saul's got height, but sanity, questionable. He battles Philistines, loses to paranoia, and ends up consulting a witch. Peak absurdity. Then David, the shepherd boy with a slingshot, slays Goliath. Or maybe Elhanan did, Bible's got edits. David flees Saul's jealousy, bands with outlaws, and eventually unites tribes. He captures Jerusalem from the Jebusites, making it his capital. Neutral ground, smart politics. Dancing with the Ark of the Covenant? Ecstatic, until his wife Michal mocks him. The pain of survival, endless wars with Philistines, Ammonites, Moabites. David's family, a nightmare. Son Absalom rebels, gets hair caught in a tree, dies tragically. Ironic legacy. The man after God's heart commits adultery with Bathsheba, murders Uriah, and sparks divine punishment. Yet the house of David endures, confirmed by the Tel Dan stele from the 9th century BCE. I killed Ahaziah, king of the house of David. Real history peeking through the legend. Solomon, David's son, takes the throne around 970 BCE, ushering in the United Monarchy's golden or gilded age. He builds the first temple in Jerusalem, a Yahweh HQ with cedar from Lebanon, gold overlays, and cherubim statues that'd make any pharaoh jealous. Trade booms, alliances with Tyre, marriages to 700 wives and 300 concubines. Diplomatic overkill? The Queen of Sheba visits, dazzled by wisdom and wealth. But irony strikes. Solomon's forced labor and taxes breed resentment, echoing Pharaoh's oppression. He dabbles in foreign gods to please wives. Asherah poles in the temple? Blasphemy alert. Prophets warn of division, and sure enough, after his death around 930 BCE, the kingdom splits. Rehoboam, his son, tells northern tribes, "My father scourged you with whips. I'll use scorpions." Boom. Rebellion. Jeroboam leads the north to form the kingdom of Israel, with calves at Bethel and Dan. Idolatry 2.0, while Judah sticks with Rehoboam in the south. The absurdity, a united kingdom, promised eternal, fractures over ego and economics. Pain of survival. Northern Israel, richer and more populous, faces Assyrian threats. Judah clings to Jerusalem's temple like a security blanket. Archaeological debates rage. Was the united monarchy a grand empire or a hill country chiefdom? Sites like Khirbet Qeiyafa suggest early Judahite forts, no pigs, urban planning. Finkelstein's low chronology pushes grandeur to the 9th century, calling Solomon a myth maker. But the Teldan Stele, hard evidence of David's line. Drop a comment. Do you buy the biblical bling of Solomon's era, or was it all exaggerated for propaganda? As we wrap this first leg of the nightmare, from prehistoric grunts to monarchical meltdowns, remember, this is just the setup. The real absurdities, the exiles, the comebacks, they're coming. Israel's history is a roller coaster of divine promises met with human folly, survival forged in fire. What hits you most so far? The patriarch's drama or the king's collapses? Let me know in the comments, and stay tuned for part 2, where empires crash the party. But let's linger a bit on those early prophets, the original doomsayers. Samuel, anointing kings while lamenting the rejection of God as ruler. Ironic, since the people demanded a king to be like other nations, only to suffer like them. Elijah and Elisha wait in the wings, but for now, it's the setup. A land where faith clashes with reality. Survival means adapting to endless invaders. The Canaanites, absorbed or displaced, their gods lingering in high places. Philistines on the coast with iron monopoly, pushing Israelites to innovate or die trying. Zoom out, this tiny land, bridge between continents, curse and blessing. Trade routes bring wealth, but armies follow. The absurdity of geography, stuck between Egypt and Mesopotamia like a referee in an eternal wrestling match. Pain, generations buried in battles, famines, plagues, yet the sarcasm of history, from nomads to nation, only to split and squabble. Biblical texts written later spin it as theology. Obey God, prosper, disobey, suffer. But hindsight's 2020, and the writers had agendas. One more ironic nugget, the name Israel. Struggles with God. From Jacob's wrestle to every exile, it's baked in. No easy rides here. Comment if you've got a favorite biblical twist. The burning bush, the Red Sea split, or David's harp skills? As empires loom, Assyria sharpening swords, the kingdoms teeter. Northern Israel under Omri builds Samaria, a hilltop fortress, but idolatry runs rampant. Ahab marries Jezebel, Phoenician princess, importing Baal worship. Cue prophetic fireworks. Judah. Hezekiah and Josiah later reform, but for now, it's fragile. The Mesha Stele, Moabite brag from 840 BCE, claims victory over Israel, mentioning Omri. Real artifacts grounding the sarcasm. We've covered ground, prehistoric to split kingdoms, but the nightmare deepens. Survival's toll. Identity forged in adversity, a people defined by what they endure. Ironic, painful, absurd. That's history's gift. What time zone are you in pondering this? Comment. The United Monarchy's breakup around 930 BCE left us with two squabbling siblings. The Northern Kingdom of Israel, with its 10 tribes and shiny new capital Samaria, and the Southern Kingdom of Judah, clutching Jerusalem's temple like a life raft. The North, under Jeroboam, dives headfirst into idolatry with golden calves at Bethel and Dan, because nothing says, "We're fine without you, God," like DIY worship. Judah, under Rehoboam, isn't exactly saintly either, with high places and Asherah poles popping up like spiritual weeds. The irony? Both claim to be God's chosen, yet they're bickering like kids over the last slice of manna. Survival's pain. Internal division makes them easy prey for empires sniffing around the Levant. Enter the 9th century BCE, and the Northern Kingdom gets a boost under Omri, a king so savvy he builds Samaria on a hilltop, thumbing his nose at invaders. His son Ahab, though, takes the cake for drama. Marrying Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who brings Baal worship to the party, Ahab sparks a showdown with Elijah, the prophet who's basically a one-man divine SWAT team. Picture Elijah on Mount Carmel, 850 BCE, challenging 450 Baal priests to a fire-lighting contest. Spoiler, Yahweh sends fire, Baal's team flops, and Elijah slaughters the priest like it's a biblical action flick. The Mesha Stele, A Moabite brag from around 840 BCE confirms Israel's clout, mentioning Omri and Moab's rebellion. But the pain, Jezebel's schemes, like framing Naboth for his vineyard, show a kingdom rotting from within. Ironic twist, Ahab's military wins can't save him from a random arrow in battle. Comment below, Elijah's fire stunt, epic or overkill? Meanwhile, Judah's not exactly chilling. Kings like Asa and Jehoshaphat try reforms, torching idols and fortifying cities, but it's like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The two kingdoms play ally and enemy, sometimes teaming up against neighbors like Aram, Syria, sometimes sniping at each other. The Tel Dan Stele from the 9th century BCE drops House of David, proving Judah's dynasty wasn't just biblical fan fiction. But here's the absurdity. While they're busy with family feuds, the Assyrian Empire's sharpening its blades. By the late 8th century BCE, Assyria's not just knocking, it's kicking the door down. Assyria, the ancient world's equivalent of a steamroller, starts flexing under Tiglath-Pileser III around 745 BCE. Northern Israel, under Pekah, tries a rebel alliance with Aram against Judah. Bad move. Judah's king Ahaz, panicking, begs Assyria for help, offering tribute like a kid handing over lunch money. Tiglath-Pileser happily obliges, crushing Aram and annexing chunks of Israel by 732 BCE. The Assyrian annals gloat about deporting thousands, replacing them with foreigners. The original population swap. By 722 BCE, under Shalmaneser V and Sargon II, Samaria falls after a 3-year siege. The northern kingdom, poof, gone. The 10 tribes scatter, some assimilated, some exiled to Mesopotamia, spawning the Lost Tribes legend. Archaeological digs at Samaria show destruction layers, burned palaces, and a ghost town. The pain, identity erased, people uprooted. The irony, Israel's idolatry, meant to secure them, invites divine wrath. Or at least, that's the biblical spin. What's your take on the Lost Tribes? Myth or history? Drop it in the comments. Judah, the scrappy survivor, watches its northern sibling implode and thinks, we're next. King Hezekiah, ruling 715 to 686 BCE, gets the memo. He's a reformer with guts, smashing idols, centralizing worship in Jerusalem, and digging the Siloam Tunnel to secure water for a siege. A 533-meter marvel still visible today. When Sennacherib, Assyria's next big bad, invades in 701 BCE, Hezekiah braces for impact. Sennacherib's prism brags about trapping Hezekiah in Jerusalem, like a bird in a cage, ravaging 46 Judahite cities. Lachish's siege ramp and mass graves, excavated at Tel Lachish, scream devastation. But here's the absurd twist. Jerusalem doesn't fall. The Bible claims an angel wipes out 185,000 Assyrian troops overnight, probably a plague or propaganda. Sennacherib's records skip the ending, just noting tribute. Either way, Judah limps on, bloodied but breathing. Survival's cost, crushing taxes, villages torched, and a king swallowing pride to pay off the enemy. Comment: was Jerusalem's survival a miracle or Assyrian overreach? Judah's reprieve is short-lived. By the late 7th century BCE, Assyria's wobbling, but Babylon's rising like a shark smelling blood. King Josiah, ruling 640 to 609 BCE, is Judah's last hope. He's the poster boy for reform. Finding a lost book of the law, probably Deuteronomy, he tears down pagan altars, burns bones of false priests, and reinstates Passover like it's a national comeback tour. The Deuteronomistic history, shaping much of the Bible, paints Josiah as the gold standard. But irony strikes. Josiah dies in a pointless battle against Egypt's Pharaoh Necho II at Megiddo in 609 BCE. Judah spirals. Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar II, smells weakness. By 597 BCE, Jerusalem's under siege. King Jehoiakim surrenders, and the elite, prophets, priests, artisans, are marched to Babylon. The first deportation begins, with Ezekiel among the exiles, ranting about visions and dry bones. Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah as puppet king, but Zedekiah's got rebellion fever. Against Jeremiah's warnings, that prophet's practically hoarse from yelling, "Don't do it." Zedekiah joins an anti-Babylon plot. Big mistake. By 587 BCE, Babylon's back and Jerusalem's toast. The siege is brutal, famine so bad mothers eat their children. Lamentations isn't kidding. The city falls, the temple's burned, its treasures looted. Zedekiah's sons are slaughtered before his eyes. Then he's blinded and chained to Babylon. The second deportation clears out Judah, leaving only peasants. Excavations at Jerusalem's City of David show ash layers, collapsed walls, and arrowheads, Babylonian rage in clay. The pain? A nation gutted, identity hanging by a thread. The absurdity? The temple, God's house, is rubble, yet faith persists. Comment. Jeremiah's doom and gloom warnings. Ignored genius or annoying buzzkill. Exile in Babylon, starting 587 BCE, is the ultimate nightmare. The Jews, now a diaspora, face assimilation's pull. Babylonian records mention Jehoiakim getting rations, but most exiles are laborers, toiling in alien lands. Yet, here's the sarcastic kicker. Exile births reinvention. Synagogues emerge, scripture takes shape, and prophets like Ezekiel and 2nd Isaiah preach hope. By the rivers of Babylon, we wept. Psalm 137. But also, a new covenant is coming. The pain of survival, loss of home, culture, under siege. The irony? Babylon's captivity forges a stronger Jewish identity, one that'll outlast empires. Meanwhile, back in Judah, the people of the land scrape by under Babylonian governors, forgotten by history's spotlight. Then plot twist. Persia's Cyrus the Great topples Babylon in 539 BCE. His famous cylinder decrees freedom for exiles, including Jews. By 538 BCE, some return to Jerusalem under Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel, tasked with rebuilding. The Second Temple begins in 520 BCE, prodded by prophets Haggai and Zechariah. It's no Solomon's masterpiece, more like a budget renovation. But it's a start. Ezra and Nehemiah, later in the 5th century BCE, tighten the screws, rebuilding walls, enforcing Torah, banning intermarriage to preserve identity. The pain? A tiny, poor community under Persian rule, surrounded by hostile neighbors like Samaritans. The irony? Exile, meant to destroy, births a resilient Judaism with scripture and tradition as new anchors. What's your take on Cyrus as Messiah, divine pawn, or PR genius? Comment. This era's absurdity peaks. A people crushed by empires, yet stubborn faith keeps them kicking. Northern Israel's gone, Judah's a husk, but the exiles carry the story forward. The biblical narrative, polished in Babylon, spins suffering as divine discipline, promising restoration. Archaeology backs the basics. Lachish's fall, Jerusalem's ashes, Persian-era Yehud coins. But the human toll? Generations lost, trauma baked into Psalms. Survival's cost is steep, but the Jews play the long game. As we pause here, the Persian period sets the stage for more chaos. Greeks, Seleucids, and Maccabees are waiting. What hits you most? Assyria's brutality, Babylon's siege, or Persia's curveball mercy? Drop a comment with your time zone and thoughts. Stay tuned for part 3, where the Hellenistic world brings new ways to make Israel's life complicated. The Persian period, post 538 BCE, is less a golden age and more a gritty reboot. Jerusalem's a backwater, Yehud a tiny province in the vast Persian Empire. The Second Temple, finished around 516 BCE, is a far cry from Solomon's bling. Think community center, not divine palace. Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah, the governor, roll in around 458 to 445 BCE, pushing Torah like it's the new constitution. They ban intermarriage, purge foreign influences, and rebuild Jerusalem's walls despite Samaritan sniping. The pain? A fragile community, scraping by under Persian taxes, surrounded by neighbors who'd rather see them fail. The irony? Exile sharpened Jewish identity, but now they're fighting to stay distinct in their own land. Ezra's public Torah readings, described in Nehemiah 8, are less inspirational sermon and more, do this or we're doomed. Comment, Ezra's strict reforms, cultural savior or joyless control freak. Then, Alexander the Great storms through in 332 BCE, flipping the script. Persia's out, Hellenism's in. Alexander doesn't destroy Jerusalem, he's too busy conquering everything, but his death in 323 BCE sparks a free-for-all among his generals. Judea's caught between the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria, like a kid stuck in a custody battle. By the 3rd century BCE, Ptolemaic rule brings Greek culture, gymnasiums, theaters, and elites ditching circumcision to fit in at the bathhouse. The absurdity. Some Jews go full Hellenistic, adopting Greek names and philosophies, while others clutch tradition like a shield. Survival's pain. Cultural erosion, with Greek ideas seeping into everything from coinage to cosmology. Drop a comment. Would you have gone Greek or stayed old school? The Sela regiment takes Judea around 200 BCE under Antiochus III, and things get messy fast. His son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, decides to crank Hellenism to 11. By 167 BCE, he bans Jewish practices, circumcision, Sabbath, Torah study, and sets up a Zeus statue in the temple, complete with pig sacrifices. Talk about a desecration flex. The Book of Daniel calls it the abomination of desolation, and it's not exaggerating. Enter the Maccabees, a family of rural priests led by Mattathias and his son Judah Maccabee. They launch a guerrilla revolt in 167 BCE, turning hills into hideouts and ambushing Seleucid troops. By 164 BCE, they retake Jerusalem, cleanse the temple, and light the menorah. Cue Hanukkah, the festival of lights born from bloodshed. The Hasmonean dynasty rises, ruling Judea as priest kings. The irony. A revolt for religious freedom spawns a dynasty that's soon as corrupt as the Greeks they fought. The pain. Constant war, with brothers like Jonathan and Simon dying in betrayals. Comment. Maccabees? Heroes or just trading one tyrant for another? Hasmonean rule, from 140 to 63 BCE, is a masterclass in overreaching. John Hyrcanus expands Judea, forcing Idumeans and Samaritans to convert. Irony alert, forcing faith on others after fighting for their own. His son Aristobulus declares himself king because priest isn't fancy enough. By the 1st century BCE, civil war erupts between brothers Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, each begging Rome for backup. Bad move. Pompey the Great strolls into Jerusalem in 63 BCE, turning Judea into a Roman client state. The temple's still standing, but Rome's shadow looms. Survival's cost, autonomy gone, taxes crushing, and local kings like Herod the Great, an Idumean with Roman backing, ruling with an iron fist. Herod, crowned in 37 BCE, is a walking contradiction. He rebuilds the Second Temple into a marble masterpiece, yet slaughters rivals, wives, and even his own sons. The massacre of the innocents in the Gospel accounts? Par for Herod's paranoid course. Comment. Herod's temple glow-up. Architectural win or tyrant's vanity project. The 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE is a pressure cooker. Roman rule brings roads, aqueducts, and garrisons, but also resentment. Judea's a tinderbox of factions. Pharisees push oral law and resurrection beliefs. Sadducees cling to temple rituals and elite status. Essenes hide in desert communes like Qumran. Hello, Dead Sea Scrolls. And zealots sharpen knives for rebellion. Enter Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter preacher whose message of love, repentance, and a coming kingdom shakes things up around 30 CE. His crucifixion under Pontius Pilate, a Roman prefect with a knack for brutality, sparks a new movement. Christians, initially a Jewish sect, spread like wildfire despite Nero's persecutions. The irony, a Jewish preacher's death births a religion that'll reshape the world, often at odds with Judaism. The pain, families split, communities clash, and Rome's watching. Drop a comment. Jesus as revolutionary or spiritual game changer. By 66 CE, Judea's fed up. Heavy taxes, corrupt governors, and religious insults ignite the first Jewish revolt. Zealots seize Jerusalem, but Rome's not playing. General Vespasian, later emperor, crushes Galilee, leaving massacres and refugees. His son Titus finishes the job in 70 CE, besieging Jerusalem. The siege is apocalyptic. Starvation, infighting, and Josephus, a Jewish turncoat historian, chronicling the horror. The Second Temple burns, its treasures carted to Rome. Check the Arch of Titus for the Menorah Parade. Jerusalem's razed, survivors enslaved or scattered. Masada, the last holdout, falls in 73 CE when zealots choose suicide over capture. Archaeology confirms the carnage. Jerusalem's burned walls, Masada's siege ramp. The pain? A nation shattered, identity tied to a lost temple. The absurdity. Rome's victory arch celebrates crushing a people who'll outlast the empire. Comment. Masada's stand, noble defiance or tragic end. Post 70. CE, Judaism reinvents itself again. With the temple gone, rabbis like Yochanan ben Zakkai shift focus to Torah study and prayer, birthing rabbinic Judaism. Synagogues replace sacrifices, and the Mishnah, codified around 200 CE, lays out Jewish law. The irony? Destruction forces adaptation, making Judaism portable, a faith no longer tied to a place. Meanwhile, Rome tightens the screws. Emperor Hadrian, around 130 CE, bans circumcision and plans a pagan city, Aelia Capitolina, on Jerusalem's ruins. Cue the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135 CE, led by Simon Bar Kokhba, hailed as a messiah. His guerrillas score early wins, minting coins with Year 1 of Israel's redemption. But Rome's patience is thin. Emperor Severus crushes the revolt, slaughtering thousands, banning Jews from Jerusalem, and renaming Judea Syria Palestina to erase Israel's memory. Caves in the Judean desert, filled with Bar Kokhba's letters and skeletons, tell the grim tale. Survival's cost. Another diaspora, more trauma. The sarcasm, a messiah who loses yet inspires hope for centuries. What's your take on Bar Kokhba? Doomed hero or reckless dreamer? Comment below. The 2nd and 3rd centuries CE see Jews dispersed across the Roman Empire from Babylon to Alexandria. Rabbinic centers in Galilee, like Sepphoris and Tiberias, produced the Talmud, a legal and ethical lifeline. Christianity, now distinct, gains traction under Constantine, who legalizes it in 313 CE. Jerusalem becomes a Christian pilgrimage hub, with churches like the Holy Sepulchre, dwarfing Jewish presence. The pain? Marginalization in their own homeland. The irony? A faith born from Judaism overshadows it, yet Jews endure, compiling texts that'll define them for millennia. Roman Judea fades, but Jewish communities thrive in exile, from Spain to Persia. As we close this chapter, Israel's story is a masterclass in defying odds. From Hellenistic culture wars to Roman massacres, every blow forges resilience. The Maccabees, Herod, Jesus, and Bar Kokhba, each leaves a mark, for better or worse. The temple's gone, but the Torah's alive. What hits you most? The revolt's fury, or the rabbis' reinvention? Drop your thoughts and time zone in the comments. Part 4 is coming, with medieval trials, crusades, and more absurd survival. Stay tuned. The Roman Empire's twilight in the 4th century CE sets a new stage. Christianity, now Rome's darling under Constantine, turns Jerusalem into a pilgrimage hotspot, with churches like the Holy Sepulchre stealing the spotlight. Jews, banned from their holy city except for one day a year to mourn at the Western Wall, are relegated to the margins. Rabbinic Judaism, born from the ashes of the temple, thrives in Galilee's academies, Sepphoris, Tiberias, where scholars like Rabbi Judah the Prince compile the Mishnah around 200 CE, and later, the Jerusalem Talmud by 400 CE. The pain? Living as exiles in your own land, under emperors who'd rather you convert or disappear. The irony? While Christians build basilicas, Jews build ideas, laws, ethics, stories that'll outlast Rome's marble. The Babylonian Talmud, polished in Mesopotamia by 500 CE, becomes the diaspora's blueprint. Comment: Talmud's creation, genius survival tactic, or just nerdy resilience? Byzantine rule, post-Rome's split in 395 CE, keeps Jews on a tight leash. Emperor Justinian's laws in the 6th century restrict synagogue building and Torah readings because nothing says control like banning scripture. Yet Jews persist, trading across the Mediterranean from Spain to Persia. Then Islam arrives in the 7th century, conquering Jerusalem in 638 CE under Caliph Umar. The shift is a mixed bag. Jews are allowed back in Jerusalem, and the Dome of the Rock rises on the Temple Mount, a new holy layer on an already crowded sacred hill. As people of the book, Jews get dhimmi status, protected but second class, paying jizya taxes and facing restrictions. The absurdity? A faith that predates Islam is now a tolerated guest in its own homeland. Survival's cost? Navigating caliphs' whims, from tolerant Umayyads to stricter Abbasids. Drop a comment. Was Islamic rule a relief or just a new kind of pressure? The medieval period is a carousel of expulsions and pogroms, especially in Christian Europe. The First Crusade in 1096 kicks things off with a bang, literally. Crusaders, en route to liberate Jerusalem, decide massacring Jewish communities in the Rhineland is a holy warm-up. Worms, Mainz, Cologne, Thousands are slaughtered or forced to convert. The pain? Entire communities wiped out, families choosing martyrdom over baptism. The irony? Crusaders fighting for a holy land ignore its original people, while Jews in Jerusalem fare better under Muslim rule. By 1187, Saladin retakes Jerusalem, and Jews trickle back, joining scholars like Maimonides, who pens the Mishneh Torah in Egypt, blending philosophy with law. Comment: Maimonides, medieval MVP or overrated thinker. Europe's Middle Ages are a nightmare gauntlet. England expels Jews in 1290, France in 1306, Spain in 1492 after the Reconquista. Spain's expulsion is peak absurdity. Jews, integral to Iberian culture for centuries, are given the boot or the stake, with conversos, forced, converts, hunted by the Inquisition. Sephardic Jews scatter to Morocco, the Ottoman Empire, and Amsterdam, carrying traditions and trauma. Ashkenazi Jews in Central Europe face blood libels, accusations of killing Christian kids for rituals, sparking pogroms. The Black Death in 1348, blamed on Jews naturally, leading to massacres in Strasbourg and beyond. Survival's pain, constant flight, rebuilding in hostile lands. The sarcasm, a people blamed for plagues they're dying from too. Comment: which expulsion hits hardest, Spain's or England's? The Ottoman Empire from the 15th century offers a breather. Sultans like Bayezid II welcome Sephardic refugees, saying Spain's loss is their gain. Jewish communities thrive in Istanbul, Salonika, and Safed, where mystics like Isaac Luria develop Kabbalah, turning spiritual pain into cosmic theories. But Europe's still a mess. The 1648 Chmielnicki uprising in Ukraine slaughters tens of thousands of Jews in pogroms that make crusades look tame. The irony? These horrors push Jewish mysticism and messianic hopes, like Shabbatai Zevi in the 1660s, who declares himself Messiah, converts to Islam under pressure, and leaves followers reeling. Survival's cost, dashed hopes, fractured communities. Drop a comment. Shabbatai Zevi, deluded fraud or tragic dreamer? The Enlightenment in the 18th century dangles freedom but delivers slowly. France's 1791 emancipation makes Jews citizens, but anti-Semitism lingers. Eastern Europe's shtetls, vibrant with Yiddish culture, faced Tsarist pogroms in Russia's Pale of Settlement. The 19th century brings Haskalah, Jewish Enlightenment, urging integration, but also Zionism's birth. Theodor Herzl, watching the Dreyfus Affair in 1894, a Jewish French officer falsely accused of treason, realizes assimilation's a trap. His 1896 book, The Jewish State, calls for a homeland. The pain? Being hated despite embracing modernity. The irony? Europe's progress fuels both emancipation and new hatreds. Comment: Herzl's Zionism, visionary or desperate? The 20th century is a brutal crescendo. Pogroms in Russia, like Kishinev in 1903, pushed Jewish immigration to Palestine, then Ottoman, later British-controlled after 1917's Balfour Declaration. Early Zionist pioneers drain swamps, build kibbutzim, and face Arab resistance. Then, the Holocaust. From 1933 to 1945, Nazi Germany's genocide kills 6 million Jews, two-thirds of Europe's Jewry. Ghettos, camps like Auschwitz, and Einsatzgruppen death squads turn survival into a grim lottery. The absurdity? A civilized world watches or collaborates. The pain? Unimaginable loss, communities erased. Survivors, like those in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising of 1943, fight back, knowing death's likely. Comment: Holocaust resistance, heroic or heartbreakingly futile? Post-1945, the world's guilt fuels momentum. The UN's 1947 partition plan offers a Jewish state alongside an Arab one. Jews accept. Arab states reject. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declares Israel's independence. The next day, 5 Arab armies invade. Against odds, Israel wins, but at a cost: 6,000 dead, 1% of its population. Palestinian Arabs face the Nakba, with 700,000 displaced. The irony? A state born from exile creates another. Survival's pain. Constant wars. 1956 Suez, 1967. Six-Day War, 1973. Yom Kippur War. each cementing Israel's existence but deepening divides. Comment: 1948. Triumph or tragedy for both sides. Modern Israel, from 1948 to 2025, is a paradox. A tech powerhouse and democracy, it's also a lightning rod. The 1967 war captures Jerusalem's Old City, uniting it under Jewish control for the first time since 70 CE, but occupations spark global debate. Peace attempts: Camp David, 1978, Oslo, 1993, falter amid mistrust. Intifadas, rockets, and settlements keep tensions high. The Abraham Accords in 2020 normalized ties with some Arab states, a rare win. Yet October 7th, 2023, sees Hamas's attack kill 1,200, igniting war. The pain? A nation always on guard. The absurdity? A people who survived empires face new threats in their own state. Comment: Israel's modern challenges, unique or history repeating? As we close, Israel's story is a sarcastic epic of survival. From Bronze Age nomads to a 2025 startup nation, every chapter drips with irony. A promised land that's a battleground, a chosen people who pay dearly for it. Archaeology, Jericho's walls, Masada's ruins, Yehud's coins, grounds the saga. Faith, from Torah to Talmud to Zionism, binds it. The pain? Endless loss from Babylon to Birkenau. The absurdity? Outlasting every empire that tried to erase them. What's the ultimate takeaway? Resilience, madness, or both? Drop your thoughts and time zone in the comments. Thanks for riding this historical roller coaster with me. Imagine stepping into the glittering halls of Versailles, that opulent playground of French kings, where the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, held court amid mirrors, gold, and grandeur. But hold your nose, dear viewer, because beneath the sparkle lurked a stench so foul it could make a skunk blush. Welcome to the top 5 horrible smells that turned this palace into a perfumed pit of despair. Stick around, because by the end, you'll be thanking your lucky stars for modern plumbing, and maybe even commenting below with your own nightmare smell stories from history. Let's dive in, shall we? Ah, Versailles. The name conjures images of lavish balls, intricate gardens, and kings strutting like peacocks in powdered wigs. But let's peel back the layers of historical glamour, shall we? Built in the 17th century by Louis XIV, this sprawling complex wasn't just a home, it was a statement. Look at me, it screamed, I'm the center of the universe. And oh, how the nobility flocked there, thousands of them, crammed into a space that was essentially a glorified hunting lodge turned mega mansion. But here's the ironic twist. For all its architectural brilliance, Versailles was a hygienic horror show. No indoor plumbing to speak of, chamber pots overflowing like forgotten punch bowls at a party, and a court full of people who bathed maybe once a month, if they were feeling extravagant. Survival in this era? It was a daily battle against the elements, disease, and yes, the unrelenting assault on your nostrils. You'd think with all that wealth, they'd invest in some basic sanitation, but no. Priorities were ball gowns and backstabbing politics. How absurd is that? Kings ruling empires yet conquering body odor? Not on the agenda. Let's set the scene properly, because to appreciate the smells, you need to feel the chaos. Picture this. It's the late 1600s, and Louis XIV has transformed Versailles into the epicenter of French power. Over 10,000 people lived or worked there at its peak. Courtiers, servants, guards, and even random hangers-on hoping for a scrap of royal favor. The palace sprawled across 2,000 acres, with the main building boasting 700 rooms. But space? That was an illusion. Nobles shared cramped apartments, servants slept in attics or hallways, and everyone mingled in the grand salons like sardines in a very fancy can. And hygiene? Forget it. Water was scarce, soap was a luxury, and the idea of daily showers would have been laughed out of court. Instead, they relied on heavy perfumes, powders, and the occasional wipe down with a scented cloth. The result? A symphony of stenches that could wilt the strongest rose in the garden. But why, you ask? Because in the absurdity of absolutist monarchy, appearance trumped reality. You looked divine, even if you smelled like death. And surviving this? It meant navigating not just the political intrigue, but the literal minefield of odors that could knock you off your silk-shod feet. Now, let's kick off our olfactory odyssey with number 5 on our list of horrible smells. The reek of rotting food and banquet leftovers. Oh, the irony. Versailles was famed for its feasts, grand banquets where tables groaned under mountains of roasted meats, pastries, fruits, and exotic delicacies from across the empire. Louis XIV himself was a glutton, hosting dinners that lasted hours, with courses numbering in the dozens. But what happened after the last toast? The scraps didn't magically disappear. Servants hauled away what they could, but in a palace without refrigeration or proper waste disposal, leftovers lingered like unwanted guests. Imagine the Hall of Mirrors, that iconic 240-foot-long gallery lined with 357 mirrors reflecting infinite opulence. By day, it was a parade ground for the elite. By night, after a ball, it became a graveyard for half-eaten pheasants, spilled wine turning to vinegar, and fruits fermenting in the heat. The air would thicken with the sour tang of decay, mingling with the sweetness of overripe peaches and the gamey rot of venison forgotten in a corner. Think about it. In an era before trash compactors or even basic bins, food waste piled up in alcoves, under tables, or was tossed into the gardens where it attracted rats the size of small dogs. Courtiers, too dainty to deal with it, stepped over puddles of congealing gravy, their embroidered shoes squelching in the mess. And the kitchens? A nightmare unto themselves. Below stairs, in the vast culinary labyrinth, chefs toiled over open fires, roasting whole oxen and baking towers of pastries. But ventilation? Minimal. Smoke from wood fires mixed with the acrid burn of scorched fats, while vats of soup simmered for days, breeding bacteria like a petri dish on steroids. Spill a cauldron of fish stew, and that briny, putrid aroma seeped into the stone floors, lingering for weeks. Survival tip from the past. If you were a servant, you learned to breathe through your mouth, or you'd retch into the very pot you were stirring. But the absurdity peaks when you consider the royal etiquette. Louis XIV's leva, the morning rising ceremony, was a public spectacle where nobles watched him eat breakfast. Crumbs from his croissants, scattered like confetti, a dribble of chocolate from his cup, ignored until it turned sticky and foul. And during grand suppers, etiquette demanded you didn't blow your nose at the table. Use your sleeve instead. Now imagine that sleeve, already crusty from yesterday's meal, adding to the ambient rot. It's hilarious in hindsight, but back then, pure pain. Diseases like dysentery thrived in this environment, turning the palace into a breeding ground for illness. One courtier wrote in his diary about the foul vapors rising from the dining halls, making even the hardiest noble gag. And yet they endured, because leaving meant losing favor. How's that for historical masochism? If you've ever left pizza out overnight and regretted it the next morning, multiply that by 1,000 and add a dash of royal arrogance. Tell me in the comments, what's the worst food smell you've encountered that rivals this? Moving up the nasal assault ladder, we arrive at number 4, the stench of unwashed bodies and sweat-soaked finery. The human element, because nothing says absolute power, like a king who hasn't bathed since the last solar eclipse. In Versailles, bathing was seen as dangerous. Doctors of the time believed it opened pores to disease. So, the elite opted for dry cleaning, rubbing down with scented cloths or dousing themselves in perfume. Louis XIV reportedly bathed only 3 times in his life, preferring to change his shirt multiple times a day instead. But shirts absorb sweat, and in a palace heated by fireplaces and crammed with bodies, sweat was inevitable. Courtiers danced the minuet in heavy brocade outfits, layers upon layers of silk, velvet, and wool, trapping heat like a sauna from hell. After hours of twirling, bowing, and flirting, those fabrics turned into soggy sponges of perspiration, breeding a musky, acrid odor that could fell a horse. Imagine the grand apartment where the king held audiences. Hundreds pressed together, their bodies radiating heat and humidity. Men's wigs powdered with flour absorbed scalp oils and turned rancid under the chandelier's glow. Women's corsets, laced tight enough to crack ribs, squeezed out every drop of sweat, which then dripped down petticoats already stiff with starch and grime. And the feet? Oh, mercy. Silk stockings and leather shoes, worn for days without washing, cultivated a cheesy, vinegary funk that wafted up with every step. Survival in this sweatbox meant mastering the art of shallow breathing, or risking a whiff that could curdle milk. The absurdity? They masked it with perfumes like civet, from cat glands, or ambergris, whale vomit, yes really, creating a bizarre cocktail of floral notes over BO. One visitor, a Prussian ambassador, described the court as a perfumed cesspool, where the air was so thick you could taste it. But let's not forget the lower classes, the servants who emptied chamber pots and scrubbed floors, their own hygiene even worse. They slept in unventilated dorms, bodies piled like cordwood, amplifying the collective reek. During winter, when windows stayed shut against the cold, the palace became a pressure cooker of human effluvia. Fevers spread, lice-infested wigs, and the itch added to the misery. Yet, the nobles pranced on, oblivious or resigned, because admitting the smell meant admitting vulnerability. It's a sarcastic reminder. In the Game of Thrones, odor was just another weapon. If a rival stank worse, you gained an edge in the sniffing hierarchy. Painful, isn't it? To think these were the trendsetters of Europe, exporting fashion while importing plagues. Have you ever been in a crowded elevator after a gym session? That's child's play compared to Versailles. Share your sweaty horror stories below. I bet they've got nothing on this. As we delve deeper into this aromatic abyss, consider the daily grind. Rising at dawn for the laver, nobles jostled for position, inhaling the overnight accumulation of night sweats from their peers. The king's bedchamber, centerpiece of it all, was a hotbed, literally, of royal perspiration. Louis, with his gangrenous leg in later years, spoiler, it smelled like death itself, but that's for later, exuded a personal aura that commanded respect, or retching. Courtiers fanned themselves with scented handkerchiefs, not for heat, but for survival. And the balls? Marathon dances where partners whirled in close proximity, exchanging breaths laced with garlic from dinner and the tang of unbrushed teeth. Dentistry? Primitive at best. Teeth blackened by sugar, breath like a dragon's after a feast. The irony, Versailles symbolized enlightenment, yet its inhabitants wallowed in medieval filth. Let's paint a vivid picture of a typical day. Dawn breaks over the manicured gardens, but inside, the air is already stale. Servants scurry, dumping night soil from pots into carts, but spills happen. Puddles of urine soaking into rugs, evaporating into ammonia clouds. Nobles awaken, douse themselves in rosewater, but it's like spraying Febreze on a landfill. Breakfast in bed, crumbs mixed with bedbugs, and the linens, changed infrequently, harbor a musty mildew. By noon, in the salons, conversations buzz amid the buzz of flies drawn to the sweat. Afternoon promenades in the gardens offer brief respite, but back inside for supper, the cycle repeats. Evening entertainments, operas, plays, packed theaters where body heat amplified everything, and bedtime, collapsing into sheets that retain the day's odors, dreaming of escape but waking to the same nightmare. The historical absurdity shines in anecdotes. Take Madame de Montespan, Louis's mistress, who bathed in milk for her skin, but even she couldn't escape the collective funk. Or the Duke of Saint-Simon, whose memoirs detail the intolerable vapors that made court life a torment. Survival meant adaptation. Some chewed cloves for breath, others carried pomanders, orange balls studded with spices, to sniff like Victorian smelling salts. But nothing truly worked. Diseases like typhoid festered in the filth, claiming lives while the survivors toughed it out for status. It's a sarcastic jab at humanity. We build palaces to the skies, yet can't conquer our own stink. If this makes you appreciate your deodorant, hit like and subscribe for more historical horrors. And comment, would you trade modern comforts for a day at Versailles? Be honest, the smells alone might send you running. Now, as we climb higher on this ladder of loathsomeness, prepare for number 3, the putrid perfume paradox. You see, in their desperate bid to combat the natural odors, the courtiers of Versailles drowned themselves in fragrances. But here's the twist. These perfumes weren't the light, citrusy spritzes of today. No, they were heavy, animal-based musks designed to overpower, not blend. Civet from African cats, musk from deer glands, castoreum from beaver. Private parts. Yes, you read that right. Essence of beaver butt was a staple. Mixed with floral oils, these created scents so potent they could mask a corpse. But in the confined spaces of Versailles, they clashed like warring armies, resulting in a headache-inducing miasma that was arguably worse than the original smells. Imagine the Galerie des Glaces during a reception. Ladies in wide panniers, their dresses infused with lavender and jasmine, but underneath, the animalic bass notes roared. Men splashed on ambergris, that waxy whale secretion prized for its earthy, fecal undertone. Ironic, considering what it hid. The air became a battlefield. Rose warring with musk, violet clashing with civet, all amplified by body heat. Over time, these perfumes turned rancid on skin, oxidizing into sour notes that stung the eyes. Survival? Carry a fan to waft it away, or risk fainting from the olfactory overload. The absurdity. Perfume was status. The more exotic, the better. Louis XIV's court perfumer crafted custom blends, but they often backfired, creating the Great Stink, as one diarist called it. And the application? Lavish. Doused on wigs, clothes, even furniture. Chairs absorbed it, releasing bursts when sat upon. But in summer, with no AC, the heat volatilized everything, turning the palace into a vaporous fog. Visitors from cleaner courts like the English recoiled in horror. One envoy wrote, "The French nobility smell like a menagerie doused in flowers." Painful irony. In pursuing elegance, they achieved the opposite. Diseases lurked in these scents too. Some contained toxins like lead, poisoning slowly. Yet, they persisted, because smelling refined meant power. Comment below. What's the worst perfume overload you've experienced? Does it beat beaver essence? Delving into specifics, the perfume industry boomed under Louis. Grasse, the perfume capital, supplied tons of essences, but quality varied. Adulterated batches turned foul quickly, adding to the chaos. Mistresses competed with signature scents, Montespan's spicy mix versus Maintenon's subtle rose, creating scent wars in bedrooms. The king's own fragrance, a bergamot musk blend, announced his approach like a royal fanfare. Of funk. Even the gardens weren't safe. Fountains sprayed scented water, but evaporation left sticky residues that attracted insects, whose buzzing added auditory misery to the nasal one. As evening fell, candlelight flickered, wax dripping and smoking, mingling with perfumes to create a hazy, choking atmosphere. Operas in the Royal Theatre? Audiences sweated under the assault, fans flapping furiously. And the morning after? Hungover from wine and scent, heads pounding. Survival in this scented hell meant building tolerance, or feigning it for favor. It's a hilarious historical footnote. The Sun King, radiant in gold but shrouded in stink. If this part has your nose wrinkling, wait for the next, where we tackle even worse horrors. Stay tuned and let me know in the comments what you think number 1 might be. Could it be the ultimate taboo? But before we pause, let's linger on the perfume's dark side. In winter, with fires blazing, scents intensified, smoke binding to musk like glue. Coughs echoed through halls, phlegm adding its own salty note. Nobles with colds blew noses into lace handkerchiefs, which then perfumed the air further. The pain of survival. Endure, or exile. Many chose endurance. Health be damned. Absurd, right? Building empires on fragrance facades. Your thoughts? Buckle up, because we're diving back into the olfactory nightmare of Versailles, where the glittering facade of royal splendor hid a stench so vile it could make a vulture gag. If you thought the rotting feasts and sweaty courtiers from part 1 were bad, brace yourself. Things are about to get nastier. We're counting down the top 5 horrible smells that turned the Sun King's palace into a perfumed cesspool. And trust me, the irony of this gilded stinkfest is as absurd as it gets. Survival in this era meant dodging disease, intrigue, and odors that could knock you into next week. Missed part 1? Go back and catch up, because we're not slowing down. And stick around. By the end, you'll be itching to comment with your own tales of historical or modern-day stench. Let's plunge into the muck with number 2 on our list. We left off with the putrid perfume paradox, where the elite drowned their body odor in animal-based musks that ended up waging war on everyone's nostrils. But now, we're stepping into a smell so revolting, it makes perfume seem like a rose garden. Number 2. The fetid fumes of chamber pots and human waste. Yes, dear viewer, we're talking about the unmentionable. Except in Versailles, it was very mentionable, because it was everywhere. Imagine the grandest palace in Europe, its marble corridors gleaming, its tapestries woven with gold, and then the unmistakable whiff of human excrement wafting from every corner. No indoor plumbing, no sewers, just a sprawling complex where thousands lived, ate, and, well, did their business in the most primitive way possible. Survival tip from the 17th century? Hold your breath and pray for a breeze. Let's paint the picture. Versailles housed up to 10,000 people at its peak. Kings, courtiers, servants, and scheming nobles, all producing waste with nowhere for it to go. Chamber pots were the solution, those unglamorous ceramic bowls tucked under beds or hidden behind screens. Every morning, servants dashed through the palace, pots sloshing with the night's offerings, racing to empty them into carts or cesspits outside. But here's the absurd reality. Spills were common. A clumsy servant, a crowded hallway, And suddenly, a puddle of urine or worse soaked into the priceless rugs. The smell? Ammonia so sharp it could strip paint, mixed with the earthy, rancid tang of feces. And in summer, when the palace baked under the French sun, those odors ripened like a compost heap, permeating the air with a stench that clung to your clothes like a bad reputation. The irony is almost laughable. Louis XIV built Versailles to showcase absolute power, yet he couldn't conquer the basic problem of waste disposal. The palace had a few latrines, primitive holes over pits, but they were reserved for the lucky few with private apartments. Most courtiers relied on chamber pots or, in a pinch, a discreet corner. Yes, you heard that right. The gardens, those manicured masterpieces by Le Nôtre, weren't just for strolls. Desperate nobles, caught short during a promenade, ducked behind hedges or statues to relieve themselves. The result? Flower beds laced with human fertilizer, their delicate scents overpowered by something far less poetic. One visitor, a Dutch diplomat, wrote in horror about the foul patches staining the gravel paths, where even the king's fountains couldn't mask the smell. Survival meant watching your step, literally, or ruining your velvet slippers in a royal mess. But let's zoom into the daily grind, because this is where the pain of history hits hard. Picture a noblewoman, her gown a cascade of lace, waking in her cramped apartment. Her maid presents the chamber pot, a ritual as routine as brushing her wig. She does her business, and the pot is whisked away. Or not, if the servant's busy dodging the hundreds of others scurrying through the palace. Left too long, that pot became a biological weapon, its contents fermenting in the heat. Now imagine the king's lever, the morning ceremony where nobles crowded his bedchamber to watch him rise. The air, thick with the night's accumulated vapors, as one courtier delicately put it. The king himself wasn't immune, his own pot, ornate as it was, added to the ambiance. And the servants? They hauled these pots through the Galerie des Glaces, dodging courtiers who pretended not to notice the sloshing nightmare inches from their silk stockings. The absurdity peaks in the logistics. Versailles had cesspits, but they overflowed regularly, especially during rainy seasons when sludge seeped back into the basements. Servants dumped waste into the Seine or nearby fields, but the palace's sheer population overwhelmed any system. Flies swarmed, rats feasted, and diseases like cholera lurked in the shadows. The nobility, obsessed with etiquette, developed bizarre coping mechanisms. Some carried scented sachets to press against their noses. Others simply grew numb, their senses battered into submission. But the lower classes, servants, cooks, stable boys, had no such luxury. They waded through the muck, their lungs steeped in ammonia, their lives shortened by the filth. It's a sarcastic jab at history. The Sun King's radiance was built on a foundation of literal crap. If you've ever dealt with a backed-up toilet, you're closer to Versailles than you think. Drop a comment. What's your worst plumbing horror story? Can it top a palace with no pipes? Now let's talk about the royal privy, because even kings had to go. Louis XIV's commode was a throne in every sense, carved, gilded, and cushioned, but its contents were as humble as any peasant's. Courtiers vied for the honor of assisting, a job that came with prestige but also the gag-inducing task of emptying it. The king's health was monitored through his waist, with doctors sniffing and inspecting like deranged sommeliers. Absurd? Absolutely. But it gets worse. During grand receptions, when nature called, nobles couldn't just excuse themselves. Etiquette demanded they stay, so they improvised. Chamber pots were passed discreetly under tables, or worse, they used the curtains. One memoir recounts a duchess, mid-conversation, squatting behind a tapestry, her face serene as the room filled with a telltale stench. Survival meant mastering this art of deception. Smile, charm, and ignore the smell. The pain of this era wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Imagine the humiliation of a young noble, new to court, slipping on a slick spot in a hallway, only to realize it wasn't wine. Or the servant, blamed for a spill, scrubbing floors while gagging. Disease was the real kicker. Typhoid, dysentery, and smallpox thrived in this filth, cutting through the court like a scythe. Yet, the show went on. Balls, operas, and hunts continued, the elite dancing through the miasma as if it were just another day in paradise. The irony? Versailles was a prison of prestige. Leave, and you lost influence. Stay, and you risked your health. It's a grim reminder. Power came at a cost, and sometimes that cost was your dignity and your nose. But let's not linger in the latrines too long, because we've got one more smell to tackle in this part. A stench so vile it makes chamber pots seem quaint. Number 1 on our list, Yes, we're saving the worst for last, and you'll need to stick around for part 3 to get the full whiff. The miasma of death and decay. Oh, you thought human waste was the low point? Think again. Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was a living, breathing petri dish where death left its mark in the air. In an era before antibiotics or proper medical care, illness was a constant companion, and the dead didn't always leave promptly. Bodies, whether from disease, duels, or old age, lingered in rooms or were carted through halls, their odors mingling with the palace's already toxic bouquet. And let's not forget the animals. Hundreds of dogs, horses, and even exotic pets roamed Versailles, leaving their own contributions to the chaos. Picture a winter evening. The palace sealed tight against the cold. A nobleman struck by fever dies in his apartment. No embalming, no refrigeration, just a body lying in state for days, as was custom, while mourners paid respects. The smell? A sickly sweet rot, like meat left too long in the sun, mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the sourness of infection. Gangrene was common. Louis XIV himself suffered it in his later years, his leg a festering mess that perfumers couldn't mask. Servants burned incense, but it only added a cloying layer to the stench. And the animals? The king's hunting dogs, kenneled nearby, left piles of dung that baked in the summer or froze in winter, releasing bursts of sulfurous funk when thawed. Horses in the stables, overworked and undercleaned, added a barnyard reek that drifted into the palace on every breeze. The absurdity is staggering. Versailles was a stage for divine right, yet it couldn't escape the mortal reality of decay. Doctors, with their leeches and purges, often made things worse, lancing boils or bleeding patients until the rooms reeked of iron and pus. Childbirth, frequent among the court's women, brought its own horrors. Miscarriages and stillbirths left behind biological debris, handled with grim inefficiency. Survival meant ignoring the smell of death, or pretending it was noble. Courtiers wrote of melancholy airs in their diaries, a polite euphemism for a stench that could make you faint. One lady-in-waiting described a banquet where a corpse in an adjacent room sent guests fleeing, their powdered faces green. Yet, protocol demanded they return, smiling through the nausea. The pain of this era was visceral. Imagine a young page tasked with carrying a shrouded body through the palace at night, the smell seeping through the cloth, his stomach churning as he navigated dark corridors. Or a mother, mourning a child lost to fever, forced to sit through a court event while the odor lingered in her rooms. Diseases spread faster in this environment. Smallpox scars marked half the court, and tuberculosis added a coppery cough to the air. The irony: Versailles was a monument to control, yet it couldn't control its own decay. Nobles masked it with bravado, but the servants, knee-deep in reality, bore the brunt. If you've ever smelled something dead and wished you hadn't, you're halfway to understanding this horror. Comment below. What's the worst smell of decay you've encountered? Can it rival a palace of corpses? As we wrap up part 2, let's reflect on the historical madness. Versailles was a paradox, a glittering cage where beauty and brutality coexisted. The chamber pots, the rotting bodies, the sheer absurdity of it all. It's a sarcastic reminder that even the mightiest empires stink sometimes. Survival wasn't just about dodging assassins or winning the king's favor. It was about enduring an assault on every sense. And we're not done yet. Part 3 will bring us to the ultimate stench, a smell so horrific it defined Versailles' dark underbelly. What do you think it is? Drop your guesses in the comments and tell me, would you last a day in this reeking royal court? Hit like, subscribe, and brace for more. The worst is yet to come. Welcome back to the stinking splendor of Versailles, where the air was as treacherous as the court's politics. If you're just joining us, we've been peeling back the gilded curtain on the top 5 horrible smells that made Louis XIV's palace a nightmare for the nose. From rotting banquet scraps to the suffocating musk of unwashed nobles, we've waded through some serious stench. Missed parts 1 and 2? Go catch up, because this olfactory horror show is only getting worse. We're diving into the final stench, the granddaddy of all foul odors, with an ironic twist that'll make you laugh, gag, and maybe even cry for the poor souls who lived through it. Survival in this glittering cesspool was a daily battle against disease, ego, and smells that could curdle your soul. Stick around and don't forget to comment. What's the worst smell you've ever braved? And could it top this? Let's hold our noses and plunge into part 3. We left off with the miasma of death and decay, where corpses and animal filth turned Versailles into a perfumed graveyard. But if you thought death was the worst of it, brace yourself for number 1. the rancid reek of the palace's sewage-filled moat and stagnant fountains. Oh yes, the crowning jewel of Versailles' stench wasn't inside the palace. It was outside, in the very features that made it famous. Those iconic gardens with their manicured hedges and sparkling fountains were a facade hiding a putrid secret. The palace's moat, originally a defensive feature, became a dumping ground for waste. And the fountains? Let's just say they weren't spraying Evian. This smell wasn't just an odor, it was a force, a choking sulfurous cloud that could make even the Sun King reconsider his life choices. Surviving this meant mastering the art of denial, because admitting the stench meant admitting the palace was a glorified swamp. Let's set the scene, because this one's a masterpiece of historical absurdity. Versailles' gardens, designed by André Lenotre, were a marvel. 1,800 acres of geometric perfection with 400 sculptures, 1,400 fountains, and a mile-long Grand Canal. Tourists gaped, ambassadors swooned, and Louis XIV strutted like a god. But beauty was skin-deep. The moat, encircling parts of the palace, was meant to evoke medieval grandeur, but by the late 17th century, it was a cesspool. With no proper sewage system, waste from chamber pots, kitchen slops, and even dead animals ended up there, either by design or accident. Servants, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of refuse, dumped buckets into the moat where it stagnated under the sun. The result? A thick, greenish sludge that bubbled with methane, releasing a stench like rotten eggs mixed with a butcher's refuse pile. One courtier, the Marquis de Dangeau, noted in his journal that the moat's vile exhalations could be smelled from the king's balcony, ruining his morning coffee. The fountains, those dazzling displays of hydraulic engineering, were no better. Powered by a complex system of reservoirs and pumps, they relied on water from local rivers and ponds, water that was far from clean. Algae bloomed, fish died, and the pipes, poorly maintained, became breeding grounds for bacteria. When the fountains sprayed, they misted the air with a fine, fetid haze, like nature's cruelest air freshener. In summer, when the court flocked to the gardens for promenades, the heat amplified the stink, turning every breath into a gamble. Imagine strolling in your finest silk, fan in hand, only to inhale a whiff of sulfur and decay that made your eyes water. Survival tip? Walk upwind, if you could figure out which way that was. The irony is delicious. Louis XIV spent a fortune on these gardens to flaunt his power, yet they betrayed him with every rancid gust. But let's zoom in on a typical day, because the pain of living through this is where the story gets real. Dawn breaks, and the gardeners are already at work, trying to clear debris from the fountains before the king's morning walk. But the water's cloudy, flecked with unidentifiable bits, and the smell wafts up like a punch to the face. Nobles gather for a garden party, their wigs powdered, their faces painted, but the moat's fumes creep in, mingling with the scent of their perfumes. Ladies clutch their fans, not for elegance but for survival, flapping desperately to ward off the stench. The Grand Canal, where the king hosted boating parties, was a particular offender. Gondolas glided through water thick with algae and waste, and passengers held scented handkerchiefs to their noses, pretending it was all very romantic. One Venetian ambassador wrote home, "The canal smells worse than the worst alleys of Venice," which, trust me, was saying something. The absurdity peaks when you consider the engineering. Louis XIV poured millions into the Machine de Marly, a massive water pumping system to feed the fountains. It was a technological marvel, but it couldn't clean the water it pumped. Mud, leaves, and worse clogged the pipes, and maintenance was a nightmare. Workers waded into the moat to clear blockages, emerging covered in slime that reeked of sulfur and rot. The servants, as always, bore the brunt. Knee-deep in filth, they scrubbed basins and hauled buckets, their lungs burning from the fumes. Meanwhile, the nobles played on, tossing coins into fountains as if they were wishing wells, oblivious to the microbial soup below. Diseases like dysentery and typhoid loved this environment, spreading through contaminated water and cutting down courtiers who thought they were above it all. The pain? Knowing every sip of water or breath of air could be your last, yet smiling through it for a chance at the king's favor. Let's talk about the animals, because they didn't help. Versailles was a zoo, literally. Louis XIV kept exotic pets like monkeys and parrots, plus hundreds of hunting dogs and horses. Their waste flowed into the moat or piled up in the stables, where flies bred in clouds. The orangery, a greenhouse for citrus trees, was a rare sweet spot, but even there, the nearby moat's stench invaded, tainting the air with a bitter edge. During festivals, when fireworks lit the sky, the smoke settled into the moat, adding a chemical tang to the organic rot. It's a sarcastic twist. The palace was a stage for divine kingship, yet its most iconic feature was a literal dump. If you've ever walked past a stagnant pond and regretted it, multiply that by 1,000, and you're halfway to Versailles. Comment below, what's the worst outdoor smell you've faced? Could it rival a royal moat? Now, let's delve into the human cost, because survival in this era was a grim game. Imagine a young gardener tasked with cleaning a fountain. He wades in, the water up to his thighs, and the smell hits. A mix of rotting fish, human waste, and something unnamably vile. His eyes sting, his stomach churns, but he works on, because quitting means starvation. Or picture a noblewoman, her dress catching on a hedge near the moat, the fabric soaking up the stench like a sponge. She returns to her apartment, trailing the smell, and her maids gag as they undress her. The king himself wasn't immune. During his daily walks, he'd pass the moat, his courtiers trailing behind, all pretending the air was as pure as his divine right. One memoir recounts Louis pausing by a fountain, only to wave his hand dismissively at the unpleasant vapors before moving on. Power meant ignoring reality, even when it smelled like death. The irony deepens when you consider the court's obsession with appearances. Versailles was about control, over nature, over people, over perception. Yet the moat and fountains mocked that control, their stench a constant reminder of mortality. Courtiers wrote poems about the garden's beauty, but diaries reveal the truth. "The air chokes," wrote one lady in waiting, "and no perfume can save us." They tried. Oh, how they tried. Servants sprinkled lime into the moat to neutralize odors, but it barely dented the problem. Fountains were drained and scrubbed, but the water source remained foul. The pain of survival was enduring this daily assault while maintaining a smile, because frowning meant weakness, and weakness meant exile from court. It's a hilarious historical jab. The Sun King ruled the world, but not his own backyard. Let's not forget the social dynamics, because even stench was political. Nobles competed to host garden parties, but a poorly timed breeze could ruin their reputation. Imagine the Duke of Orléans throwing a lavish fete, only for the moat's fumes to send guests fleeing, their fans flapping like panicked birds. Or the king's mistress, Madame de Maintenon, trying to seduce Louis in a moonlit grove, only to be interrupted by a whiff of sewage that killed the mood. The lower classes, meanwhile, had no escape. Gardeners, stable boys, and water carriers lived in the shadow of the moat, their health crumbling under the weight of disease and exhaustion. Smallpox, cholera, and fevers thrived in this environment, and the death toll was staggering. Yet, the court danced on, their silk shoes crunching over gravel paths laced with filth. As we wrap up this stench-soaked journey, let's reflect on the absurdity. Versailles was a paradox, a monument to human ambition, undone by human waste. The moat and fountains were meant to dazzle, but they horrified. Survival meant adapting to a world where beauty and brutality were inseparable, where you held your nose and your tongue to keep your place. The pain? Knowing that every breath was a risk, every step a potential disaster. The irony? This was the pinnacle of civilization, yet it stank like a medieval slum. If this makes you grateful for modern sewers, hit like and subscribe for more historical horrors. And comment, would you brave the moat for a day at Versailles? What's your guess for how they coped with this final stench? But we're not quite done. Part 4 will tie it all together, exploring how the court survived this nasal nightmare and what it says about the human condition. We'll look at the desperate measures, pomanders, perfumes, and sheer stubbornness that kept Versailles running despite its odors. Plus, we'll reveal the ultimate survival tip, how to thrive in a palace where the air itself was the enemy. Drop your thoughts below. What's the worst smell you've ever endured, and how does it stack up to a moat full of royal refuse? Stay tuned, because the finale will leave you gasping for fresh air. Here we are, at the grand finale of our stench-soaked saga through Versailles, where the Sun King's palace dazzled the eyes but assaulted the nose. If you've stuck with us through the rotting feasts, sweaty nobles, overpowering perfumes, overflowing chamber pots, and that vile moat, you deserve a medal, or at least a nose plug. Missed the first 3 parts? Go back and brace yourself, because this journey through the top 5 horrible smells of Versailles has been a wild, ironic ride. We're wrapping up with how the court survived this olfactory nightmare, the absurd lengths they went to mask the unmaskable, and what it all says about the human condition in a world where power trumped hygiene. Survival in this glittering hellhole was a testament to stubbornness, denial, and a whole lot of perfume. Ready for the end? Let's dive in, and don't forget to comment. Tell me how you'd survive a day in this reeking royal court, or share your own worst smell stories. Let's close this out with a bang. We've just waded through the rancid reek of the sewage-filled moat and stagnant fountains, the crowning stench that turned Versailles' gardens into a sulphurous swamp. But how did anyone live through this daily assault on their senses? How did thousands of nobles, servants, and even the king himself keep calm and carry on in a palace that smelled like a landfill crossed with a slaughterhouse? The answer lies in a mix of desperation, ingenuity, and sheer arrogance, because in Versailles, admitting defeat to a smell was as bad as losing a duel. Let's explore the survival strategies, the absurd coping mechanisms, and the grim reality of a court that danced through the stench like it was just another day in paradise. It's a sarcastic reminder. Humanity's greatest triumphs often come with a whiff of something awful. First, let's talk about the noble art of denial. In Versailles, ignoring the stench was a skill honed to perfection. Courtiers, obsessed with appearances, treated smells like political rivals. Acknowledge them, and you've already lost. Picture a grand ball in the Hall of Mirrors, chandeliers blazing, music swirling, and the air thick with the combined funk of sweat, waste, and decaying banquet scraps. A nobleman, resplendent in velvet, sips wine while a chamber pot spill seeps into the floor nearby. Does he flinch? Never. He smiles, bows, and compliments the hostess on her charming ambiance, as if the room doesn't smell like a stable. This wasn't just etiquette, it was survival. Admitting the palace stank meant admitting the king's perfect world was flawed, and that could cost you your place at court. The irony: these were the most powerful people in Europe, yet they were powerless against their own filth. If you've ever pretended a bad smell wasn't there to save face, you've got a taste of Versailles. Drop a comment. When have you had to fake it through a stench? But denial only went so far. When the air was so thick you could chew it, the court turned to physical defenses. Enter the pomander, the 17th century equivalent of an air freshener you could wear. These were small, ornate balls, often silver or gold, stuffed with spices like cloves, cinnamon, or dried orange peel, sometimes laced with exotic resins like myrrh. Nobles carried them on chains or tucked them into sleeves, sniffing them like smelling salts when the moat's fumes or a nearby corpse got too much. Ladies pinned them to their gowns, turning stench defense into a fashion statement. But here's the absurd twist. Pomanders were expensive, often costing more than a servant's yearly wage, yet they were about as effective as spraying perfume on a pig. The spices dulled the edge of the stench but couldn't mask it entirely, creating a bizarre clash of cinnamon and sewage. Survival meant investing in these trinkets, not because they worked, but because they signaled wealth and resilience. Imagine spending a fortune to smell slightly less bad. Sound familiar? Share your worst failed fix for a bad smell in the comments. Perfume, of course, was the heavy artillery in this war on odor. We touched on this in part 1 with the putrid perfume paradox, but let's dig deeper into the madness. Versailles was ground zero for the perfume industry, with Grasse churning out gallons of floral and animal-based scents. Courtiers didn't just dab on a little eau de cologne. They drenched themselves, their wigs, their clothes, even their furniture. Louis XIV's own perfumer, Marshall, crafted blends so potent they could knock out a horse. Bergamot, musk, and civet, anyone. But in the cramped, overheated rooms of Versailles, these scents turned traitor. Sweat, heat, and time soured them, creating a rancid fog that was worse than the original stink. One ambassador described a reception where the perfume was so thick, it choked like smoke, leaving guests coughing and dizzy. The pain? Knowing your expensive scent was betraying you, yet slathering on more because it was expected. Survival meant embracing this absurdity, because a scentless noble was a nobody. Ever overdone it with cologne and regretted it? Tell me about it below. For the lower classes, survival was less glamorous. Servants, who bore the brunt of the palace's filth, had no pomanders or perfumes. They relied on grit and numbness. Picture a scullery maid scrubbing a floor stained with spilled stew and urine, her hands raw, her nose burned out from days in the kitchen's smoky haze. Or a stable boy shoveling horse dung near the moat, the sulphurous stench so familiar it barely registered. These were the unsung heroes of Versailles, keeping the palace running while the elite pranced above. Their coping mechanism? Work through it or die trying. Diseases like cholera and typhus hit them hardest, spread by the very filth they cleaned. The irony is cruel. The palace's splendor depended on their suffering, yet they were invisible. their noses sacrificed to the greater good. If you've ever had a thankless job with a bad smell, you're closer to these servants than you think. Share your story in the comments. Let's not forget the architectural attempts at salvation, because even the palace itself tried to fight back. Sort of. Ventilation was a fantasy in most of Versailles. Windows were small, often sealed in winter to keep out the cold, trapping the stench inside like a pressure cooker. The Galerie des Glaces had high ceilings, which helped a bit, but the air still stagnated, heavy with the ghosts of last night's feast. Louis XIV did commission some upgrades, like better latrines for his private apartments, but these were drops in a very smelly bucket. Cesspits were dug deeper, but they still overflowed. The machine de Marly pumped water for the fountains, but as we learned in Part 3, that water was a bacterial nightmare. The absurdity? Every solution created new problems. Build a bigger cesspit, and it just meant more waste to stink up the place. Survival meant accepting that the palace was a beautiful trap, its flaws as permanent as its grandeur. If you've ever lived in a place with bad plumbing, you know the pain. Tell me about it below. The human cost was staggering, and not just for the servants. Nobles weren't immune to the consequences of their filthy paradise. Smallpox, dysentery, and tuberculosis thrived in the palace's miasma, and the lack of hygiene made every illness deadlier. Childbirth was a gamble. Miscarriages and infections were common, and the stench of medical procedures, think pus and blood, added to the horror. Louis XIV himself, in his later years, suffered from gangrene, his leg a festering wound that no perfume could mask. Courtiers still bowed and scraped, but their diaries reveal the truth. "The king's apartment reeks of death," wrote one. Survival meant pretending it didn't, because loyalty trumped health. The pain was psychological too. Imagine the stress of maintaining a perfect facade while choking on the air. It's a hilarious historical irony. The court was a prison of their own making, where the price of power was a daily dose of nausea. But let's zoom out and reflect on what this all means, because the smells of Versailles aren't just a gross footnote. They're a mirror to human nature. The court's obsession with appearances, their willingness to endure filth for status, shows how far we'll go for power. Louis XIV built a palace to control everything: nature, politics, even perception. But he couldn't control the stench. The nobles, chasing his favor, traded their health for a chance at glory, wading through a sensory nightmare with a smile. The servants, meanwhile, had no choice, their lives spent in the literal and figurative shadows. It's a sarcastic lesson. Humanity's greatest achievements often come with a catch, and in Versailles, that catch was a noseful of hell. The absurdity lies in the contrast. Gold and grime, beauty and brutality, all in one place. If this makes you appreciate your shower and sewer system, you're not alone. Comment. What modern convenience are you most grateful for after hearing this? Let's wrap up with a day in the life, because the daily grind ties it all together. Imagine waking in Versailles, 1680. You're a courtier, cramped in a tiny apartment. The air's already stale, a mix of last night's chamber pot and the moat's distant fumes. You douse yourself in musk, slip on a wig that smells like old flour, and head to the king's lever. The bedchamber's crowded, the air thick with sweat and perfume, but you bow and smile, ignoring the itch of lice in your wig. Breakfast means dodging crumbs and spilled wine, their sourness mingling with the room's funk. By noon, you're in the gardens, where the fountains spray a misty stench, and you clutch your pomander like a lifeline. Evening brings a ball, where you dance through the heat, sweat soaking your silk, the air a cocktail of body odor and rotting food. Bedtime? You collapse into sheets that haven't been washed in weeks, praying you don't catch the fever going around. Survival meant endurance, denial, and a strong stomach. Sound exhausting? It was. As we close this stench-filled journey, let's marvel at the historical madness. Versailles was a monument to human ambition, but its smells were a reminder of human limits. The court survived by pretending the problem didn't exist, by masking it with perfumes and pomanders, by sheer force of will. But the cost was high. Disease, discomfort, and a daily battle against the air itself. The irony. This was the pinnacle of civilization, yet it stank like a medieval slum. The pain, knowing you were one breath away from disaster, yet playing the game anyway. The absurdity, building a palace to rival the gods, only to drown in your own filth. If this series has left you gagging, laughing, or just grateful for modern plumbing, hit like and subscribe for more historical deep dives. And comment. Could you survive a week in Versailles? What's the worst smell you've ever faced, and how does it compare to a palace of poop and perfume? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Imagine this. A lonely speck in the endless Pacific, dotted with colossal stone heads gazing eternally at the horizon, as if waiting for visitors who never came. Or did they? Now, DNA whispers a secret. The ancient people of Easter Island weren't as isolated as we thought. They mixed it up with South Americans long before Europeans crashed the party. Buckle up for a tale of oceanic odysseys, ecological enigmas, and genetic plot twists that turn history's isolation myth into a sarcastic joke on survival. The Pacific Ocean. That vast, mocking blue expanse, covering a third of the Earth like a watery blanket thrown over ancient secrets. It's the stage for one of humanity's most absurd adventures, the Polynesian expansion, a saga of people who looked at endless waves and thought, yeah, let's sail that with nothing but stars, birds, and sheer audacity. We're talking about folks who, starting around 3000 BCE from Taiwan or Southeast Asia, hopped islands like cosmic frogs, colonizing the remotest dots on the map. The pain of survival? Imagine cramming your family into a double-hulled canoe, loaded with taro roots, chickens, and rats. Yes, rats, the accidental protein source, only to face sharks, scurvy, and storms that could swallow you whole. Ironic, isn't it? These master navigators turned the ocean's nightmare into a highway, but every voyage was a gamble with death. Drop a comment. Would you risk it all on a canoe across the Pacific, or stick to dry land? Let's rewind to the roots. The Austronesian peoples, ancestors of Polynesians, kicked off this madness around 5,000 years ago. Linguistic clues, words for boats, coconuts, and pigs shared across islands, paint a picture of methodical madness. They island hopped through Melanesia, mixing with locals, then pushed into Micronesia and Polynesia proper. By 1500 BCE, they're in Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, the Polynesian heartland. Here, society blooms. Hierarchical chiefs, intricate tattoos, oral epics recited like ancient podcasts. But survival's sting? Volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, resource scarcity on tiny atolls. One bad cyclone, and your village is history. The absurdity, they thrive, developing wayfinding techniques that make GPS look lazy, reading wave patterns, bird flights, cloud formations. It's like nature's cryptic crossword, and they're solving it blindfolded. Fast forward to the big push around 1000 to 1200 CE, when Polynesians fan out to Hawaii, New Zealand, and yes, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as the locals call it. Why? Overpopulation, chiefly rivalries, or just the human itch to explore. Whatever the reason, it's peak historical irony. While Europeans are bumbling around the Mediterranean, arguing over flat Earth nonsense, these guys are conquering the world's largest ocean. The voyages? Brutal. Simulations suggest trips lasting weeks, with crews navigating by the Southern Cross, swelling seas, and the occasional helpful current. Pain points. Dehydration turns tongues to sandpaper, hallucinations from sunstroke, and the constant fear of missing land entirely, dooming you to a watery grave. Yet, they make it. Comment below. What's more impressive? Polynesian navigation or modern space travel? Now zoom in on Rapa Nui. This triangular volcanic rock, just 15 miles long, sits 2,300 miles from Chile and 1,300 from the nearest Polynesian island. Discovered, more like stumbled upon around 800 to 1200 CE. Dates debated like a family feud. Oral traditions speak of Hotumatua, the legendary chief who, fleeing strife in Hiva, maybe the Marquesas, loads 7 canoes with kin and crops, following a dream or a shaman's vision. They spot the island after months at sea. Or was it deliberate? Either way, arrival's no party. Barren lava fields, limited fresh water, palms for timber but soil that's finicky. The first settlers? Maybe 20 to 100 hardy souls, planting sweet potatoes. Hold that thought. We'll circle back. Bananas and taro in volcanic craters turned gardens. Survival's nightmare. Adapting to isolation where one drought could wipe you out. Ironic twist. They name it Te Pito Ote Henua, navel of the world, as if this forsaken speck is the universe's center. Life on early Rapa Nui, a mix of triumph and toil. They build ahu platforms, stone altars for ceremonies, and carve moai, those iconic statues, starting small but scaling up to ego-driven giants. Why the statues? Ancestor worship, mana power, or chiefly one-upmanship? Chiefs commission them to flex status, crews of dozens quarrying Rano Raraku volcano's tough stone, shaping heads with basalt tools. The pain? Backbreaking labor under a relentless sun, accidents claiming lives, all for statues that walk to their spots via ropes and logs. Or so theories go. Absurdity, investing resources in art while resources dwindle. But hey, culture thrives. Petroglyphs of birdmen, Rongo script, undeciphered, adding mystery, and the Birdman cult, where warriors swim shark-infested waters for eggs in a yearly death race. Comment: Birdman competition, ultimate survival sport, or insane ritual? As population grows, estimates say from hundreds to thousands by 1400 CE, the island's ecology groans. Palms vanish, cleared for fields, canoes, statue transport. Soil erodes, birds flee, fish stocks dip. The traditional narrative, popularized by Jared Diamond's Collapse, paints a eco-suicide, overpopulation, deforestation, leading to war, cannibalism, and crash before Europeans arrive in 1722. But wait, recent DNA says hold your horses. No collapse? More on that later. For now, imagine the irony. A paradise turned prison by their own hands. Survival's pain, famine whispers, clans feud over scraps, yet they endure, adapting with rock mulch gardens to conserve water. It's history's sarcastic lesson: thrive, then barely survive. But here's the genetic bombshell twisting the tale. DNA from ancient bones reveals Native American ancestry in Rapa Nui people, dating to around 1300 to 1500 CE, pre-Columbus. How? Polynesians sailing east to South America, or vice versa. Sweet potatoes, native to the Andes, appear in Polynesia centuries ago. Botanical clue: chicken bones in Chile with Polynesian DNA. Debate rages. The absurdity: while Europeans discover America in 1492, Pacific folks might have beaten them by 200 years, mingling genes in a cross-ocean hookup. Pain of those voyages? Even riskier than westbound, against winds, currents. Imagine Rapa Nui sailors, pushed by curiosity or storm, washing up on Chile's coast, trading tools, tales, and DNA. Comment: Polynesians in South America. Fact or fantasy? Diving deeper, the 2020 Nature study analyzed modern Rapa Nui DNA, finding 8% Native American admixture around 1200 CE. A 2024 update on ancient skeletons confirms it. No European mix till later, and debunks total isolation. Ironic, right? The most remote inhabited island wasn't remote enough to avoid continental flings. Survival's angle. Contact brings new crops, ideas, but risks disease, conflict. Perhaps South American rafts, balsa wood Kontiki style, as Thor Heyerdahl theorized in 1947, made the trip. Heyerdahl's raft voyage proved possible, but DNA points to Polynesians as the initiators, bold explorers fetching sweet potatoes and jeans. Picture the encounter: Polynesian canoe spots South American shore, crew emaciated but alive. Locals, maybe Mapuche or earlier groups, wary but curious. Trade ensues. Obsidian for tubers. Stories swapped under stars. The pain? Language barriers, potential skirmishes. The long haul home with new passengers or partners. Absurdity. Two worlds collide in the Pacific's middle, rewriting isolation myths. Back on Rapa Nui, this mix fuels resilience. Hybrid vigor, perhaps, helping weather internal woes. Yet the island's story darkens. By 1600 CE, oral histories hint at long ears versus eye, short ears clans warring, maybe metaphor for invaders or class divides. Moai toppled in fits of rage or ritual. Ecology bites. Without trees, no new canoes for fishing or escape. Rats gnaw palm nuts, accelerating deforestation. Unintended saboteurs. The nightmare. A society imploding, yet DNA shows steady population. No crash. Recent studies challenge Diamond. Carbon dating, pollen analysis suggests sustainable, if strained living. Ironic, we projected our eco-fears onto them, but they adapted, painfully. Engage with this. What if contact with South America saved them? New blood, ideas staving off inbreeding. Comment your theory. As part 1 wraps, we've set sail from Polynesian origins to Rapa Nui's settlement, laced with DNA's sarcastic reveal. The absurdity of human wanderlust, survival's relentless grind, it's all here. Stay for part 2, deeper into Moai madness, European discovery, and colonial horrors. What's your take on the sweet potato clue? Drop it below. But let's linger on those voyages. Polynesian navigators like Mau Piailug, who in 1976 sailed Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments, proved the skill. Pain. Months adrift. Navigating by feel. On Rapa Nui, first footprints in sand. Hope amid desolation. They terraform. Chickens scratch soil. Dogs hunt. But isolation breeds unique culture. Rongo Rongo tablets, wooden glyphs, perhaps world's last invented script, tease undeciphered secrets. Absurd. A literate society in the middle of nowhere, yet we can't read it. The genetic mix. Studies like Ioannidis' 2020 work trace it to Colombia or Ecuador coasts, around 1200 AD. Ironic timing. Same era as Moai boom. Perhaps returnees inspired bigger statues. Survival's pain. Integrating outsiders. Cultural clashes. Yet, it enriches. Hybrid myths, perhaps. More irony. Europeans arrive late. Jacob Roggeveen, Dutch explorer, spots it Easter, 1722. Hence the name. He sees thriving people but notes deforested land. Contact, disease, decimates. But pre that, South American link mocks European firsts. We've covered origins, voyages, settlement, DNA twist, groundwork for chaos ahead. What surprises you most, navigation feats or genetic mingling? Comment. We're back on Rapa Nui, that tiny triangle of lava and hubris in the middle of nowhere, where the Polynesians landed around 800 to 1200 CE, hauling sweet potatoes, chickens, and a knack for survival that'd make Bear Grylls weep. By the 13th century, they're not just surviving, they're flexing. The Moai, those massive stone heads, really full-body statues but the heads steal the show, hit their peak. Some are 30 feet tall, weighing 80 tons, carved from Rano Raraku's tuff with obsessive precision. Why? To honor ancestors, channel mana, or just because Chief Hotshot wanted to outdo Chief Bigshot? The pain, hundreds of men sweating under a brutal sun, chiseling with basalt tools, dragging these behemoths across the island using ropes, logs, or sheer willpower. Accidents? Plenty. Crushed limbs, broken dreams. The irony. They pour everything into these statues while the island's ecosystem wheezes, palms disappearing faster than a buffet at a family reunion. Comment. Moai obsession, spiritual masterpiece, or ultimate vanity project? The logistics are absurd. Picture this. A team of 50 to 100 workers, chanting, sweating, inching a multi-ton statue across rocky terrain. Theories range from walking them with ropes, a rhythmic rock and roll, to sleds on log rollers. Either way, it's a nightmare of coordination. Deforestation accelerates, palms cut for rollers, canoes, or fields. Pollen records show the island's forest shrinking by 1400 CE, replaced by grasslands. Rats, those stowaway snacks from Polynesian canoes, munch palm nuts, sabotaging regrowth. The pain of survival, no trees, no new boats, no deep-sea fishing. Fish stocks near shore dwindle, and crops like taro and sweet potato strain to feed thousands. Estimates peg 7,000 to 10,000 people at peak. Ironic twist, the statues, meant to immortalize their makers, choke the very resources keeping them alive. Drop a comment. Were rats the real villains, or just nature's scapegoats? Now let's talk about that South American connection again, because it's the historical equivalent of finding a plot twist in a thriller you thought you'd cracked. DNA studies, like the 2020 Nature paper and 2024 updates, confirm Rapa Nui people had Native American ancestry by 1300 CE, likely from a coastal group in Colombia or Ecuador. How'd it happen? Polynesian sailors, masters of the Pacific, likely hit South America, traded, mingled, and brought back more than just sweet potatoes. Imagine the scene. A double-hulled canoe, beaches on Chile's coast. Exhausted navigators meeting wary locals. Language barriers? Sure, but trade. Obsidian for tubers, maybe a few marriages. Bridges the gap. The pain? Voyages back to Rapa Nui against winds and currents could take months, with starvation or storms claiming lives. The absurdity? While Europe's stuck in the Dark Ages, Polynesians are pulling off transcontinental meet and greets. Comment. Who made the trip? Polynesians east or South Americans west? What's your bet? This genetic mix-in isn't just a footnote, it's a game changer. Sweet potatoes, a South American crop, are archaeologically confirmed in Polynesia by 1000 CE chicken bones in Chile, dated pre-Columbus, carry Polynesian DNA markers. It's not airtight, but it's spicy. Maybe Rapa Nui returnees brought new farming tricks, helping stretch resources. Or maybe new blood diversified the gene pool, dodging the inbreeding trap of isolation. But survival's still a grind. By 1500 CE, clans are fracturing. Oral traditions whisper of long ears versus short ears, possibly elites versus commoners or newcomers versus locals. Moai toppling begins, not by outsiders but by Rapa Nui themselves, maybe in clan wars or ritual defiance. The sarcasm: build statues to unify, then knock them down in a fit. Pain: communities turn inward, fighting over scraps as soil erodes and birds vanish. Comment: toppling Moai, rage quit or sacred act. The Birdman cult emerges around this time, a bizarre pivot. At Orongo Village, overlooking shark-infested waters, clans compete yearly. Swim to Motu Nui Islet, grab a sooty tern egg, swim back, and crown your chief Birdman. It's like an Olympic death match, with drowning or shark snacks as real risks. Why? Power, prestige, or a desperate bid to unify a fracturing society? The petroglyphs, birdmen, vulvas, sea creatures, scream desperation for fertility, fish, anything to keep going. The absurdity: as resources tank, they invent a ritual that's half spiritual, half extreme sports. Survival's cost: lives lost in the waves, energy spent on pageantry instead of solutions. Drop a comment. Birdman contest: badass or bonkers? Here's where the collapse myth gets messy. Jared Diamond's collapse painted Rapa Nui as an eco-disaster poster child. Overpopulation, deforestation, war, cannibalism, done by 1722 when Europeans arrive. But archaeology and DNA beg to differ. Radiocarbon dating, pollen studies, and human remains show no sudden crash. Population stabilized, maybe at 3,000 to 5,000 by 1600 CE. Rock mulch gardens, stones shielding crops from wind and drought, prove ingenuity. No mass starvation or war scars in bones, though oral tales hint at skirmishes. The pain: living on the edge, every harvest a gamble. The irony: we slapped our eco-anxieties on them, but they adapted. Barely, painfully, but they did. Comment: collapse myth, overblown or half true? Then the Europeans crash in. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen hits Rapa Nui on Easter Sunday, 1722, hence the name. He sees 2,000 to 3,000 people, moai standing, crops growing, but notes the treeless landscape. His crew marvels at the statues but doesn't stick around to ask questions. The pain of first contact? Smallpox and other diseases, carried on European breath, start nibbling at the population. The absurdity? Roggeveen calls it a discovery, as if thousands of years of Polynesian hustle didn't count. Spanish arrive in 1770, claiming the island for King Carlos III. Classic colonial flex. They leave a cross, some pigs, and probably more germs. By 1774, Captain Cook swings by, noting a poor but functioning society, with moai still upright. Comment: European discovery. Arrogant or just clueless? The 19th century is where the real nightmare kicks in. Peruvian slavers raid in 1862, kidnapping 1,500 Rapa Nui, half the population, for guano mines and plantations. Most die in captivity. Survivors bring back smallpox, slashing numbers to a few hundred by 1877. The pain: a culture gutted, families torn apart. The irony: the island's isolation, once a shield, makes it easy pickings for slavers who see savages, not navigators. Catholic missionaries arrive, converting survivors, banning traditional practices like tattooing. Rongo Rongo script, those mysterious wooden tablets, fades as elders die. Chile annexes Rapa Nui in 1888, turning it into a sheep ranch. Natives confined to one village, their land leased to wool barons. Survival's cost: identity eroded, freedom gone. Drop a comment. Slavers or missionaries? Who did more damage? Through it all, the South American DNA lingers, a silent testament. Modern Rapa Nui carry that 8% Native American marker, a genetic echo of ancient voyages. It's not just biology, it's a middle finger to the isolation myth. While moai fell, Birdman races faded, and Europeans wreaked havoc. That pre-Columbian contact hints at resilience. Maybe those South American crops or genes helped Rapa Nui limp through ecological strain. The sarcasm, a people we called doomed, were globalized before globalization was cool. As we wrap part 2, Rapa Nui's story is a sarcastic survival epic. Moai mania, eco-challenges, and colonial gut punches. The pain of dwindling resources, the absurdity of European saviors who brought death. Yet, the culture endures, DNA weaving Polynesian and South American threads. What hits you hardest? Moai logistics or slaver raids? Comment with your time zone. Part 3's coming, with revival attempts, modern struggles, and more genetic twists. Stay tuned. But let's linger on that Birdman cult. Its peak, Rapa Nui, a society staring down collapse, inventing a ritual where the winner's chief rules for a year. The cliffs of Orongo, the sharky waters. It's a gamble for glory. The pain, losing sons to the sea. The irony, as the island shrinks, they dream bigger. And those Moai, toppled by 1800, some say clans desecrated rivals' statues, others say earthquakes or neglect. Either way, they're a fallen testament to ambition. The genetic clue keeps nagging. That 1300 CE contact, maybe a single voyage, maybe more, shows Rapa Nui wasn't a dead end. It's a sarcastic jab at history's narrative. While Europe plotted crusades, Pacific peoples were rewriting human connection. Painful voyages, absurd ambition, survival's grind. It's all Rapa Nui. What's your take on the Moai's fall? War or weariness? Drop it below. Picture Rapa Nui in the late 1800s, a speck in the Pacific battered by waves and worse, human greed. Chile's annexation in 1888 turns the island into a colonial footnote, a giant sheep ranch run by the Williamson Balfour Company. The Rapa Nui, now a mere 100 to 200 souls after smallpox and slaver raids, are confined to Hangaroa, a cramped village, while their ancestral lands become a wool factory. The pain? Families barred from sacred sites, Moai toppled or ignored, their culture treated like a museum relic. The irony? Chile claims an island already gutted by outsiders, calling it progress while natives live like prisoners. Survival's cost, language fades, traditions erode, and the Rongorongo script, those enigmatic wooden tablets, becomes a whisper as elders die. Comment: colonial ranching, capitalist hustle, or cultural crime. The 19th century's end is a low point. Catholic missionaries, hell-bent on saving souls, banned tattoos, traditional dances, and the Birdman cult's death-defying egg hunts. The Rapa Nui, converted en masse, chant Latin instead of ancestral songs. The absurdity? Missionaries see themselves as heroes, yet their schools teach kids to forget who they are. Meanwhile, the Moai, once spiritual giants, are quarried for stone or left to erode. Some even shipped off as curios to European museums. The pain of survival, a people clinging to identity as their gods are literally carted away. But there's a flicker of defiance. Oral stories persist, passed in secret, keeping Hotumatua's legacy alive. Drop a comment. Missionaries, well-meaning or wrecking ball. Enter the 20th century, and Rapa Nui's a forgotten outpost. Chile's navy governs, but it's less rule and more ignore. The Rapa Nui scrape by, fishing and farming sweet potatoes, those South American gifts from centuries ago, still a staple. That DNA link, confirmed by studies like the 2020 Nature paper, lingers in their veins. 8% Native American ancestry, a genetic middle finger to the idea of total isolation. It's a sarcastic twist. While the world writes them off as a lost civilization, their blood tells a story of ancient globalism. Imagine the pain of those 1300 CE voyages. Polynesians battling currents to reach South America, or maybe Andean rafts drifting west. Either way, it's a testament to grit, not collapse. Comment: that DNA mix, proof of epic voyages, or just a fluke? The early 1900s see glimmers of revival. Anthropologists like Catherine Routledge visit in 1914, documenting Moai and oral histories. She's stunned by the Rapa Nui's resilience, noting their humor despite hardship. But colonial neglect continues. The sheep ranch chugs on, grazing land barren, while the Rapa Nui are banned from leaving Hangaroa without permits, like inmates on their own island. The irony? The world's obsessed with their statues, yet the people who carved them are invisible. Survival's grind, malnutrition, tuberculosis, and a population stuck at a few hundred. Yet they adapt, blending Catholic rites with ancestral reverence. Moai become saints in local lore. Drop a comment. Rapa Nui blending faiths. Clever or desperate? Mid-20th century brings slow change. World War II's global shakeup makes remote colonies like Rapa Nui less ignorable. By 1953, Chile ends the sheep ranch lease, but the Navy's grip tightens. The Rapa Nui, now around 1,000, push for rights. A 1966 revolt, led by Alfonso Rapu, demands citizenship and land reform. Chile grants it, sort of. Rapa Nui become Chilean citizens, but land returns are sluggish, and the island's a tourist trap for Moai gawkers. The pain? Fighting for your home against bureaucrats who see you as a postcard. The absurdity? Tourists snap photos of statues while locals can't afford fish. But revival grows. Schools teach Rapa Nui language, banned under missionaries, and elders revive chants. Comment. 1966 revolt. Turning point, or too little, too late. Archaeology in the 1950s to 60s flips the script. Thor Heyerdahl's 1947 Kon-Tiki voyage, proving South American rafts could reach Polynesia, sparks debate. His digs on Rapa Nui find sweet potato traces and Moai quarries, but his South Americans settled Polynesia theory flops. DNA says Polynesians sailed east. William Malloy's excavations reveal Moai transport methods, ropes, not aliens, and debunk collapse myths. Carbon dates and pollen show deforestation was gradual, not catastrophic. Rock gardens sustained crops. The irony: the doomed Rapa Nui were innovators, not eco-villains. Pain: their stories been hijacked by doomsday narratives. Comment. Heyerdahl, visionary or wrong-headed? The 1970s to 80s see cultural rebirth. The Rapa Nui language, nearly extinct, gets a boost as activists like Juan Hawa teach kids. Tapati, a festival launched in 1969, celebrates Moai, music, and the Birdman legacy with less deadly competitions. Think cultural Olympics. But tourism's a double-edged sword. By 1980, thousands visit yearly, boosting the economy but straining resources. Moai restoration, like the 15 re-erected at Ahu Tongariki in 1995, draws crowds but sparks debates. Sacred sites or theme park? Survival's cost, balancing heritage with cash flow. The sarcasm: a people who survived slavers now sell t-shirts to survive. Drop a comment. Tapati Festival, cultural win or tourist bait? That South American DNA keeps nagging. Studies confirm contact around 1200 to 1300 CE, likely Polynesians reaching Chile, bringing back crops and genes. It's not just science, it's a sarcastic jab at history's blind spots. While Europe was crusading, Rapa Nui were global pioneers. The pain? Those voyages cost lives. Storms, starvation, or hostile locals could end you. The absurdity: a tiny island's people touched a continent, yet we called them isolated. Imagine a Rapa Nui sailor back home, teaching sweet potato tricks or telling tales of strange lands. It's a legacy of audacity, woven into their survival. Comment. Sweet potatoes, game changer, or just a snack? By the 1990s, Rapa Nui's population hits 3,000, a rebound from near extinction. Chile's democratic shift post-Pinochet brings reforms, but tensions simmer. Land disputes flare. Rapa Nui demand ancestral plots, while Santiago drags its feet. In 1993, the film Rapa Nui dramatizes clan wars and collapse, annoying locals who see it as Hollywood nonsense. The irony? The world loves their story but gets it wrong. Survival's pain, fighting for agency in a globalized world. Yet, Rapa Nui activists like Piru Huk push for autonomy, citing Polynesian roots and that South American link as proof of their cosmopolitan past. Drop a comment. Hollywood's take: harmless fiction or cultural theft? As we close Part 3, Rapa Nui's story is a masterclass in defiance. From colonial cages to cultural revival, they've navigated a nightmare of erasure with grit and irony. The Moai stand, not as ruins but as middle fingers to oblivion. The DNA link, Polynesian-South American fusion, mocks the isolation myth. Pain, a culture nearly lost. Absurdity, thriving despite it all. What hits you most? Revolt, revival, or that genetic plot twist? Comment with your time zone. Part 4's coming, with modern battles, global spotlight, and Moai mysteries. Stay tuned. But let's linger on that 1966 revolt. Alfonso Rapu, a teacher, rallies Rapa Nui against naval rule, demanding schools, voting, land. It's no guns-blazing rebellion, just petitions and protests, but it works. Citizenship comes, yet Chile keeps control. The pain, fighting your own country for rights. The irony, winning on paper, losing on land. And those Moai? Some re-erected with cranes, not mana, yet they draw UNESCO status in 1995, cementing Rapa Nui's global cachet. The DNA story's a kicker. That 8% Native American marker, stable across centuries, screams connection. Maybe it fueled resilience, new blood, new ideas. The sarcasm, while we obsessed over European discoveries, Rapa Nui were the original globetrotters. What's your take? Revolt or DNA as the bigger deal? Drop it below. Welcome to Rapa Nui in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, where the past crashes into the present like a moai falling off its ahu. By the 1990s, the island's population creeps toward 4,000, a phoenix-like rebound from the 1877 low of barely 100 souls. Chile's grip, loosened after the 1980s democratic shift from Pinochet's dictatorship, still chafes. The Rapa Nui are Chilean citizens, but land disputes burn hot. Ancestral plots remain in government or private hands, while locals demand restitution. The pain? Fighting for your own dirt on an island you've called home for a millennium. The irony? The world's obsessed with your statues, but your rights? Hey, talk to Santiago's bureaucrats. Comment: land disputes, legit grievance, or endless stalemate. Tourism is the new colonial overlord. By 2000, tens of thousands flock yearly to gape at Moai, now UNESCO World Heritage icons since 1995. Ahu Tongariki's 15 restored statues, re-erected with Japanese funding after a 1960 tsunami, draw selfies and sighs. The Tapati Festival, born in 1969, explodes into a cultural juggernaut. Think haka dances, banana sled races, and mock birdman contests, minus the shark-infested swims. It's a cash cow, pumping millions into the economy. But here's the sarcasm. Rapa Nui perform their heritage for tourists, while sewage from hotels strains their water supply. Survival's cost. Your culture's a global brand, but your island's ecosystem groans. Overgrazing's ghost replaced by over-tourism. Drop a comment. Tapati. Cultural pride or tourist circus? That South American DNA keeps winking at us. Studies, like the 2020 Nature paper and 2024 Ancient Bone Analyses, peg 8 to 10% Native American ancestry in Rapa Nui, dating to 1200 to 1300 CE. It's not just a genetic footnote, it's a sarcastic jab at the isolated island myth. Polynesians sailed 2,300 miles east to Chile or Peru, swapped sweet potatoes, jeans, maybe stories, then hauled back to Rapa Nui against killer currents. The pain? Voyages where half the crew might not return, lost to storms or starvation. The absurdity? While Europe was bumbling through the Middle Ages, Rapa Nui were the original transcontinental networkers. Imagine a Polynesian sailor teaching Andean locals to carve better fish hooks, or a Mapuche woman joining the return trip, planting sweet potatoes in volcanic soil. Comment: that DNA link, epic adventure, or ancient one-night stand? The 21st century amps up the stakes. By 2010, Rapa Nui activists like Marisol Hitoi push for autonomy, citing their Polynesian roots and that South American connection as proof of a global heritage. Protests erupt. 2010 sees locals occupying government buildings, demanding land and self-governance. Chile responds with riot police, tear gas, and promises of dialogue that fizzle. The irony: an island famous for its statues is still a political afterthought. Survival's grind, balancing global fame with local powerlessness. Yet, Rapa Nui culture thrives. Schools teach the language, banned a century ago, and Rongo-Rongo-inspired art pops up in galleries. The pain: every step toward revival fights a tide of globalization. Drop a comment. Autonomy push. Righteous fight or uphill battle? Climate change crashes the party. Rising seas threaten Ahu platforms. Heavier rains erode Moai bases. By 2020, studies warn that 30% of Rapa Nui's archaeological sites could be underwater by 2011. The sarcasm: after surviving deforestation, slavers, and smallpox. Now the ocean itself wants a piece. Tourism, capped at 100,000 visitors annually by 2018 laws, still strains resources. Freshwater's scarce, trash piles up. Rapa Nui adapt, again, with solar panels and conservation projects echoing their ancestors' rock mulch gardens. The pain? Fighting nature's wrath while feeding tourist dollars. Comment: climate threat. Rapa Nui's next big test, or just history's encore? Archaeology keeps rewriting the script. Recent digs like those by Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt debunk the collapse myth harder. No evidence of mass warfare or cannibalism, just steady adaptation. Obsidian tools, fishhooks, and garden stones show a people who stretched resources thin but didn't break. Moai transport? Likely walked with ropes, not logs, saving trees. The irony. We painted Rapa Nui as eco-villains, but they were sustainable-ish, outlasting our assumptions. That South American link, sweet potato pollen and 1000 CE sediments, ties to their resilience. Maybe those Andean crops eased famine fears. Comment: no collapse. Vindication or revisionist hype. The global stage elevates Rapa Nui's voice. In 2022, a fire sparked by drought damages 60 moai, spurring international aid. Rapa Nui leaders like Tiare Aguilera lobby UNESCO for protection, not just of statues but of culture, language, dances, oral tales of Hotu Matua. The absurdity. The world cares more about stone heads than the people who carved them. Yet, Rapa Nui youth embrace their roots. YouTube channels teach Polynesian navigation. TikTok revives Haka. The pain, preserving identity in a digital age. The sarcasm, a culture that sailed oceans now needs Wi-Fi to survive. Drop a comment. Social media revival, cool or cringeworthy? Politically, the needle moves slowly. By 2025, Chile grants more land back, but full autonomy's a dream. The Rapa Nui National Park, covering half the island, is co-managed with locals, a win after decades of protests. Yet, tensions flare. 2023 saw clashes over tourist overreach, with locals blockading the airport. The irony, an island that welcomed ancient voyagers now gatekeeps to protect itself. Survival's cost, constant vigilance against cultural dilution. The DNA story fuels pride. Rapa Nui weren't just survivors, they were connectors, linking Polynesia to South America before Columbus was born. Comment: airport protests, bold move, or PR misstep? As we close, Rapa Nui's saga is a sarcastic masterpiece of endurance. From 800 CE settlers to 2025 activists, they've dodged extinction through ingenuity and defiance. Moai still stand, mocking time. DNA ties to South America laugh at isolation. The pain? A history of loss, land, lives, lore. The absurdity? Outlasting empires, slavers, and now climate change, all while posing for tourist photos. Archaeology, Moai quarries, sweet potato traces, grounds the tale. Culture, tapati, language revival, binds it. What's the ultimate takeaway? Resilience, madness, or both? Drop your thoughts and time zone in the comments. Thanks for riding this Pacific roller coaster. But let's linger on those moai. They're not just statues, they're Rapa Nui's soul, carved in stone. Restoring them, as in 1995's Tongariki project, isn't just archaeology. It's reclaiming mana, the pain. Cranes can't restore lost knowledge. The irony, tourists fund preservation but erode the island's heart. And that DNA, it's a badge of honor. Rapa Nui as global players, not castaways. The future, climate's a beast, but Rapa Nui have faced worse. From ancient voyages to modern protests, they're history's ultimate underdogs. What's your bet? Will Rapa Nui outsmart the sea again? Comment below. Imagine stepping into the scorching sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile whispers secrets and the pyramids stand as eternal tombstones to forgotten egos. But forget the glamorous tales of Cleopatra or Ramses. Today, we're unearthing the most paranoid pharaoh of them all, Akhenaten, the sun-worshipping weirdo who turned a thriving empire into his personal fever dream. Strap in, because this guy's obsessions make modern conspiracy theorists look like optimists. By the end, you'll be questioning if absolute power really does corrupt absolutely, or if it just drives you bonkers. Let's dive into this sandy nightmare, shall we? Ah, ancient Egypt, the land where gods walked among men, or at least that's what the pharaohs wanted you to believe. Picture this. It's around 1353 BCE, and the Nile Valley is buzzing like a hive of overworked bees. The people are toiling under the relentless sun, building temples, farming floodplains, and dodging crocodiles, all while paying homage to a pantheon of deities that could fill a modern comic book roster. Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis. The list goes on, each god with their own quirky domain, from fertility to the afterlife. Life's a grind, sure, but it's predictable. You wake up, pray to the right god for a good harvest, avoid the pharaoh's tax collectors, and hope the annual flood doesn't wash away your mud brick hut. Survival? It's a daily dice roll against famine, disease, and the occasional hippo attack. But hey, at least the gods have your back, if you bribe them with enough offerings. Enter Amenhotep IV, soon to be known as Akhenaten, the son of the mighty Amenhotep III, who ruled like a boss, expanding Egypt's borders and amassing wealth that would make Jeff Bezos blush. Young Amenhotep grows up in the lap of luxury, palaces dripping with gold, servants fanning him with ostrich feathers, and an education in the arts of kingship. But something's off about this kid. Whispers in the corridors suggest he's not your typical heir. Tall, lanky, with a strangely elongated skull and hips wider than a Nile barge. Modern historians speculate Marfan syndrome or some genetic quirk. But back then, it just added to his aura of otherworldliness. The pain of survival for a royal, not the physical labor, but the crushing weight of expectation. Every move scrutinized, every decision a potential dynasty killer. No wonder paranoia brews like beer in a Theban tavern. But Akhenaten doesn't start as a paranoid mess. No, he eases into it, like a slow boil. When he ascends the throne at around 18, he inherits a golden age. Egypt's at its peak. Trade routes bulging with ivory, gold, and spices. Vassal states in Nubia and the Levant sending tribute like clockwork. The priests of Amun, the top dog god, are richer than the pharaoh himself, their temples veritable fortresses of influence. Amenhotep IV begins conventionally enough, building additions to Karnak Temple, honoring the old gods. But here's the ironic twist. While the people sweat and suffer under the system, the pharaoh starts questioning it. Why so many gods? Why divide the divine pie when one slice could rule them all? Enter the Aten, the sun disk, that blazing orb in the sky that's always been there but never got top billing. Akhenaten latches onto it like a lifeline, seeing it as the sole creator, the life giver, the everything. Absurd, right? In a polytheistic paradise, he decides monotheism is the way to go. Survival in this era meant appeasing the gods, plural, but Akhenaten flips the script, risking cosmic backlash for his obsession. Let's paint the scene of his early reign because the absurdity ramps up quick. Thebes, the capital, is a sprawling metropolis of mud bricks, limestone temples, and bustling markets where merchants hawk everything from linen to lapis lazuli. The air's thick with incense, the chants of priests echoing off the pylons. Amenhotep IV marries Nefertiti, the beauty whose bust would later captivate museums, and they start popping out kids like it's a royal quota. But whispers of discontent brew. The pharaoh begins commissioning art that's different. Gone are the idealized, muscular figures of old. Now it's elongated necks, potbellies, and androgynous forms. Historians call it the Amarna style, but back then, it must have looked like the artists were on some Nile-grown hallucinogens. The pain here is cultural. Imagine your leader suddenly declaring that all your cherished traditions are bunk. Temples start featuring the item prominently, rays ending in hands blessing the royal family. The people, they're confused, toiling in fields while wondering if their old prayers still count. Comment below. If your boss suddenly changed the entire company religion, would you quit or play along? As years tick by, say year 5 of his reign, Akhenaten's paranoia kicks in like a sandstorm. He changes his name from Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. A big middle finger to the Amun priesthood. It's like renaming yourself to spite your ex. The absurdity. He's not just tweaking policy. He's dismantling a belief system that's held Egypt together for millennia. Survival for the average Egyptian means navigating this shift. Do you chisel out Amun's name from your amulet or risk the pharaoh's wrath? Priests, once untouchable, now scramble as funds dry up. Akhenaten diverts resources to Aten worship, building open-air altars where the sun can shine directly. No more dark sanctuaries, everything's out in the open, exposed, just like his growing suspicions. Why paranoid, you ask? Well, imagine being the guy who upends the religious order. The Amun priests aren't thrilled, their powers evaporating faster than Nile water in summer. Rumors of plots swirl. Akhenaten starts seeing enemies in every shadow. He moves the capital from Thebes to a virgin site in the desert, Akhenaten, modern Amarna, a brand new city dedicated to the Aten. Think about the historical nightmare. Thousands of workers dragged from their homes, forced to build in the blistering heat. No shade, no established water sources, just faith in the pharaoh's vision. Bricks stamped with his name, boundaries marked by stelae proclaiming eternal devotion. The pain of survival? For laborers, it's backbreaking toil, sunstroke, and meager rations. One wrong move, and you're scorpion food. For nobles dragged along, it's leaving luxurious villas for tent-like setups in the dust. Akhenaten's obsession with purity means no old gods allowed, statues smashed, names erased. It's cultural vandalism on a grand scale, all because one man couldn't handle sharing the spotlight with imaginary friends. Let's linger on the move to Amarna, because it's peak absurdity. The site? A barren plain flanked by cliffs, chosen because the sun rises between two hills, mimicking the Aten's hieroglyph. Romantic, sure, but practical? Not a chance. Workers quarry stone, mix mortar, erect palaces while sand whips their faces. Akhenaten and Nefertiti pose as the divine couple, their daughters frolicking in reliefs that show intimate family life, unheard of in rigid Egyptian art. But beneath the surface, paranoia festers, boundaries stalely worn against straying, as if the desert isn't punishment enough. The pharaoh's hymns to the Aten, inscribed everywhere, wax poetic about the sun's benevolence, but ignore the human cost. "You rise beautiful on the horizon," he croons while his subjects blister and bleed. The irony, in pursuing a pure faith, he creates a dystopian enclave where survival means total submission. Ever felt trapped in a bad job where the boss's whims rule everything? That's Amarna life. Tell me in the comments, what's the craziest thing a leader has made you do? As Amarna rises, palaces with gardens irrigated by the Nile, tombs carved into cliffs, Akhenaten's obsessions deepen. He bans other gods outright, sending chisel gangs to hack away at Amun's name across Egypt. Temples defaced, offerings redirected. The priesthood? Demoted or exiled, their wealth funneled into Aten cults. Paranoia manifests in isolation, foreign correspondence, the Amarna letters, show vassals begging for aid against invaders. But Akhenaten's too busy sun-gazing to respond. Hittites nibble at borders, but the pharaoh's like, the Aten will handle it. Absurd, right? An empire crumbling while the ruler plays house in his desert utopia. The pain for diplomats and generals, watching influence wane, letters ignored, as survival means placating a detached despot. Nefertiti plays a starring role in this madness, elevated to near pharaoh status. Reliefs show her smiting enemies, a job usually reserved for kings. Was she co-regent? Historians debate, but the sarcasm writes itself. In a male-dominated world, Akhenaten shares power with his wife, but only because she's part of his Aten-obsessed bubble. Their daughters, 6 of them, feature prominently. But sons? Scarce, hinting at fertility issues or that genetic quirk. The royal family becomes the sole intercessors with the Aten, cutting out priests entirely. Survival for the court? Flattery and conformity. One slip, like mentioning Osiris, and you're out. The nightmare. Living in fear of the pharaoh's moods, the sun's heat mirroring his fiery temperament. But let's not gloss over the daily grind in Amarna, because that's where the historical pain hits hardest. Imagine a commoner transplanted there. Your hut's half-built, water's rationed, and the Aten's rays beat down mercilessly. No shade trees, just open courtyards for worship. Food? Imported, often spoiled in transit. Disease spreads in cramped quarters. No herbal remedies without invoking forbidden gods. Children play in dust, learning hymns instead of traditional tales. The absurdity? Akhenaten preaches universal love via the Aten, but his regime's a police state, with officials enforcing monotheism like thought police. Tombs depict blissful afterlives under the sun disk, but reality's grim. Premature deaths, malformed skeletons unearthed by archaeologists suggest malnutrition and inbreeding. Akhenaten's personal paranoia peaks in his later years. Art shows him increasingly isolated, family scenes tinged with melancholy. Rumors of a co-regency with Smenkhkare, possibly Nefertiti and Drag or a son, hint at succession worries. The Aten's exclusivity means no afterlife insurance from other gods. Talk about high-stakes gambling. The pharaoh's health declines, that elongated body failing under stress. Survival, popping painkillers from willow bark, but no divine intervention beyond the sun. The irony, he who controls the gods dies like any mortal, his obsessions leaving a fractured legacy. As we wrap this part, consider the ripple effects. Egypt's economy strains under the move, trade disrupted, military neglected, vassals rebel, borders shrink. Akhenaten's dream, a paranoid paradise where the sun rules all. But at what cost? The people endure, because what choice do they have? Stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into the height of his madness, the family dramas, and the beginning of the end. What do you think drove Akhenaten over the edge? Power, illness, or just bad advice? Comment below, and let's unpack this pharaonic fiasco together. Welcome back to the sun-scorched, paranoia-drenched world of Akhenaten, Egypt's most unhinged pharaoh, whose obsession with the Aten turned a thriving empire into a desert fever dream. If you missed part 1, go catch up. You'll need the context to grasp the full absurdity of this guy's reign. We're diving into the top 5 obsessions that defined Akhenaten's rule, from his monotheistic madness to his family fixation, all wrapped in an ironic bow of historical lunacy. Picture a ruler so paranoid he thought he could control the gods themselves, while his people sweated, suffered, and wondered if the Nile would ever make sense again. Survival in this era was a gritty game of dodging the pharaoh's whims and the sun's wrath. By the end, you'll be itching to comment. Tell me, what's the craziest obsession you've ever witnessed, and could it top a pharaoh's solar insanity? Let's plunge back into the sands of Amarna. We left off with Akhenaten uprooting Egypt's capital to Akhetaten, his custom-built utopia in the desert, where the Aten reigned supreme and everyone else just tried to stay alive. This move wasn't just a change of address, it was a middle finger to tradition, a paranoid power play to isolate himself from the Amun priests and their influence. But the deeper he sank into his sun-worshipping rabbit hole, the wilder his obsessions became. Let's kick off with number 5 on our list of Akhenaten's paranoias, his obsession with erasing the old gods. This wasn't just reform, it was cultural annihilation, a scorched earth policy against a pantheon that had defined Egypt for centuries. Imagine waking up one day to find every church, mosque, or temple in your town defaced, their symbols chiseled out because the boss decided one deity's enough. That's the nightmare Akhenaten unleashed. And the irony? He thought he was saving Egypt, but he was sowing chaos. Picture Amarna in its early days, around 1348 BCE, 5 years into Akhenaten's reign. The city's rising fast, palaces, temples, and tombs sprouting from the sand like mirages. Workers, drenched in sweat, haul limestone under a sun that's less a god and more a tyrant. Akhenaten, now fully committed to his Aten-only agenda, sends teams across Egypt with chisels and hammers, defacing anything tied to Amun, Osiris, or the rest. Temples at Karnak and Luxor, once sacred, become quarries for his new vision. Statues lose their faces, inscriptions are hacked away, and offerings to the old gods, redirected to the Aten's open-air altars. The absurdity is staggering. A pharaoh, believed to be a living god, decides he's the only middleman to divinity. Survival for priests of Amun meant exile or groveling conversion, their wealth and status evaporating like morning dew. For the common folk, it was confusion. Your grandmother's amulet of Isis is suddenly contraband, and you're praying to a sun disk you barely understand. Comment: if someone banned your traditions overnight, would you fight or flee? The pain of this obsession hit hardest at the ground level. Imagine a farmer in the Nile Delta, far from Amarna. You've spent your life offering grain to Osiris for a good afterlife, but now royal agents are smashing his shrines. Your village priest, once a pillar, is jobless, muttering about curses. Survival means adapting. Learn the Aten's hymns or risk being labeled a heretic. But the paranoia driving this wasn't just theological, it was personal. Akhenaten saw the Amun priests as a cabal, their wealth and influence a threat to his divine mandate. Letters from the period, those Amarna letters we mentioned, hint at his growing isolation, ignoring pleas from allies while he fixated on purging the past. The irony? By erasing the old gods, he alienated his own people, planting seeds of rebellion. It's like burning your house down to get rid of a spider. Ever had a boss so obsessed with one idea they tanked everything else? Share your story below. Now let's move to number 4. His obsession with his family as divine intermediaries. Akhenaten didn't just worship the Aten, he made his family the sole bridge to it, turning his wife Nefertiti and their daughters into a holy PR campaign. This wasn't just nepotism, it was a paranoid power grab, ensuring no one else, especially those pesky priests, could claim divine favor. In Amarna's art, the royal family is everywhere. Reliefs show Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters basking in the Aten's rays, hands extended like a celestial hug. It's intimate, almost wholesome, until you realize it's propaganda. No other pharaoh put his kids on such a pedestal. Traditional art showed kings smiting enemies, not playing happy family. The absurdity? Akhenaten's selling a new religion where he's the high priest, Nefertiti's the co-star, and their kids are junior deities. Survival for courtiers meant worshipping this family like gods, or risking banishment to the desert. Nefertiti's role is particularly wild. Reliefs depict her driving chariots, smiting enemies, tasks usually reserved for pharaohs. Was she co-regent? Some say yes, pointing to her titles like Great Royal Wife and Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt. Others think she was just a glorified hype woman. Either way, she's central to Akhenaten's vision, her beauty immortalized in that iconic bust, with its serene smile hiding the stress of propping up a paranoid regime. The daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, and the rest, feature in every major scene, their names tied to the Aten like royal branding. But the pain of survival here was real. Imagine being one of those girls, raised in a fishbowl, expected to embody divinity while the empire grumbled. Or a noble, forced to bow to a toddler as a semi-goddess. The nightmare? One misstep, like forgetting to praise the royal kids, could land you in exile. Comment. Would you play along with a boss who made their family untouchable? Or push back? The paranoia behind this obsession stems from Akhenaten's need for control. By making his family the Aten's sole representatives, he cut out the middlemen, priests, advisors, anyone who might challenge him. But it backfired. The Amarna letters show vassal kings begging for troops as Hittites and Habiru raiders nibbled at Egypt's borders, but Akhenaten's too busy commissioning family portraits. His generals, sidelined, must have been livid. Imagine watching your empire shrink because the boss is obsessed with his wife's photo ops. The irony? Elevating his family made them targets. Rumors of plots against Nefertiti swirl in later records, and the mysterious Shmenkare, possibly a son or even Nefertiti under a male name, hints at succession drama. Survival meant navigating this family cult, where loyalty to the pharaoh's bloodline was non-negotiable, even as the world burned. Let's zoom in on a day in Amarna, because the daily grind reveals the human cost. It's 1345 BCE, and you're a scribe in the new capital. Dawn breaks, the Aten, blazing over the cliffs. You trudge to the palace, papyrus under arm, dodging workers hauling bricks for another Aten temple. The air's thick with dust and the sour smell of spoiled grain, rations barely enough to keep you going. At the royal court, Akhenaten and Nefertiti hold a ceremony, offering heaps of bread and beer to the sun disk. You scribble their hymns, praising the Aten's life-giving rays, but your stomach growls, and you know half those offerings will rot in the heat. Outside, laborers collapse from exhaustion, their families praying to forbidden gods for relief. The absurdity. You're surrounded by wealth, gold, linen, incense, but survival means pretending this desert utopia isn't a death trap. Ever been stuck in a project that looked great on paper but was hell to live through? Tell me in the comments. The paranoia seeps into every corner. Guards patrol Amarna's boundaries, not just for invaders, but for dissenters. Priests of the old gods, if caught, face exile, or worse. Akhenaten's officials, the eyes of the Aten, snoop for signs of disloyalty, turning neighbors into snitches. The pain? Living in a surveillance state where a whispered prayer to Amun could end you. The irony? Akhenaten's vision of universal love breeds fear, not unity. His hymns carved on tomb walls preach joy, but archaeological finds, malnourished skeletons, child burials, tell a grimmer story. Survival for the average Egyptian meant keeping your head down, singing the pharaoh's tune, and hoping the Nile didn't dry up while he ignored the world. As this obsession with family divinity peaks, cracks appear. Nefertiti vanishes from records around year 12, maybe dead, maybe sidelined, maybe ruling as Smenkare. Daughter Meketaten dies young, her tomb showing a tragic childbirth scene. Akhenaten's grief, etched in reliefs, hints at a man unraveling, his paranoia now tinged with loss. The empire's fraying, trade routes falter, allies defect. But he doubles down, commissioning more art, more temples, as if the Aten can fix it all. The nightmare. A ruler so obsessed with his family's divine status that he misses the collapse around him. It's like a CEO blowing millions on a vanity project while the company tanks. Comment. What's the worst leadership fail you've seen? And does it beat Akhenaten's family obsession? As we wrap part 2, let's reflect on the madness. Akhenaten's erasure of the old gods and elevation of his family weren't just quirks. They were paranoid power moves that shook Egypt to its core. The people endured, laborers, nobles, even his own kids, because survival meant bending to his will. The irony? His quest for purity left a legacy of chaos, his utopia, a sandy prison. The pain? Knowing every day was a gamble against a pharaoh who saw enemies everywhere, even in the heavens. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll dive into his obsession with his own divinity and the physical toll of his reign. What do you think pushed him further into paranoia? Grief, power, or something else? Drop your guesses below, and let's keep unraveling this pharaonic train wreck. Welcome back to the sun-baked, paranoia-soaked saga of Akhenaten, Egypt's most eccentric pharaoh, whose obsession with the Aten turned the Nile Valley into his personal sandbox of delusion. If you're just joining us, you've missed the wild ride through his early reign and the chaotic move to Amarna. Go catch parts 1 and 2 for the full scoop on this sun-worshipping oddball. We're counting down the top 5 obsessions that defined Akhenaten's rule, each one a masterclass in historical absurdity, dripping with irony and the gritty pain of surviving a world where one man's whims could upend an empire. Picture a pharaoh so paranoid he thought he could rewrite divinity itself, while his people dodged scorpions, starvation, and his increasingly unhinged decrees. By the end, you'll be dying to comment. What's the wildest obsession you've ever seen? And could it outshine Akhenaten's solar insanity? Let's dive back into the desert madness. We left off with Akhenaten's obsessions with erasing the old gods and elevating his family as divine intermediaries, turning Amarna into a cultish enclave where loyalty to the royal family and the Aten was non-negotiable. But as his reign hits its peak, around 1345 BCE, roughly 8 years in, the paranoia deepens and his fixations get weirder. Let's plunge into number 3, his obsession with his own divinity. Most pharaohs claim to be living gods, but Akhenaten took it to a whole new level, styling himself as the Aten's earthly embodiment, a walking, talking sunbeam who didn't just rule Egypt, but was its spiritual epicenter. The irony: in trying to be a god, he alienated his people, his allies, and maybe even his own sanity. Survival in this era meant worshipping a man who thought he was the sun, while the real sun roasted you alive. Absurd, right? Let's unpack this divine disaster. Imagine Amarna at its zenith, a city gleaming with limestone palaces and open-air temples, all designed to let the Aten's rays bathe everything in holy light. Akhenaten's not just a pharaoh anymore, he's the Aten's avatar, depicted in reliefs with those same rays ending in hands, blessing him and Nefertiti like celestial high fives. Unlike traditional pharaohs who shared divine status with gods like Horus or Ra, Akhenaten cuts out the middleman. He's not channeling a god, he is the god, or at least the closest thing to it. His hymns, carved on tomb walls, call the Aten the sole god, like whom there is no other. But the subtext screams, "And I'm his BFF." The absurdity is off the charts. A ruler with a frail, elongated body, possibly riddled with genetic issues, declaring himself divine, while his empire frays at the edges. Survival for courtiers meant chanting his praises, even as they whispered about his ego behind closed doors. Comment: if your leader declared themselves a god, would you bow or bail? This obsession wasn't just spiritual, it was political dynamite. By claiming sole divinity, Akhenaten sidelined everyone else: priests, nobles, even his own generals. The Amun priesthood, already gutted, had no role in his new order. Temples to the Aten were staffed by loyalists, not traditional clergy, and offerings went straight to the royal family, not a divine bureaucracy. The pain of survival hit the elite hardest here. Imagine a high-ranking official used to wielding influence through Amun's cult, now reduced to a glorified cheerleader for the pharaoh's god complex. Your wealth's gone, your status shaky, and you're stuck in a desert city with no shade, praising a man who thinks he's the sun. The nightmare. One wrong word, one hint of skepticism, and you're banished to the quarries. For the common folk, it's worse. Your taxes fund this madness, your labor builds its monuments, and your prayers to old gods are now treason. Ever worked for someone with a messiah complex? Share your story below. It can't be worse than this, can it? The paranoia fueling this obsession shows in Akhenaten's actions. He didn't just promote the Aten, he enforced it with a zeal that screams insecurity. Boundary stele around Amarna declare the city eternal, but also warn against dissent, as if he feared his own people would bolt. His art doubles down. Reliefs show him larger than life, his family dwarfing others, his face distorted into an almost alien form. Was it artistic choice, or a reflection of his physical quirks? Historians debate, but the effect was clear. He looked otherworldly, untouchable, divine. Yet the Amarna letters, those desperate pleas from vassal kings, reveal a ruler ignoring real threats. Hittites raid the Levant. Allies beg for troops, but Akhenaten's too busy posing as a god to care. The irony? His divine posturing weakened Egypt, making him less a god and more a liability. It's like a CEO tweeting about their genius while the company goes bankrupt. Comment: what's the worst case of self-delusion you've seen in a leader? Let's zoom into a ceremony, because this is where the absurdity shines. It's high noon in Amarna, the sun blazing like a spotlight on Akhenaten's ego. He stands in an open courtyard, arms raised, chanting to the Aten as priests pile offerings, bread, beer, incense, at his feet. Nefertiti's beside him, their daughters waving like tiny divas. The crowd, nobles and officials, chant along, their voices strained from heat and fear. Outside, laborers haul stone for yet another altar, their backs blistered, their rations thin. The air's thick with dust and the sour tang of sweat, but Akhenaten's hymns drown it out, praising the Aten's perfect beauty. The pain? Knowing this spectacle costs lives, workers die in the quarries, soldiers fall on undefended borders, while the Pharaoh plays deity. Survival means clapping, because silence is suspicious. The nightmare? You're trapped in a cult where the leader's divinity is the only truth, and dissent means death. Ever been in a meeting where you had to fake enthusiasm for a bad idea? Tell me about it below. Now, let's shift to number 2. His obsession with controlling art and image. Akhenaten didn't just rewrite religion. He revolutionized how Egypt saw itself, enforcing a new artistic style that was as bizarre as his theology. The Amarna style, those elongated skulls, potbellies, and androgynous figures, wasn't just a trend. It was a mandate, a paranoid attempt to control perception. Traditional Egyptian art was rigid, idealized, pharaohs as muscle-bound warriors, gods as timeless icons. Akhenaten said, "Nah, let's get weird." His statues show him with a long neck, sunken cheeks, and hips that scream fertility goddess, not warrior king. Nefertiti and the kids get the same treatment, their images plastered across Amarna like propaganda posters. The absurdity? He's reshaping reality itself, forcing Egypt to see him as he sees himself. A divine oddity, above human norms. Survival meant embracing this weirdness, or risking the chisel. This obsession wasn't just aesthetic, it was psychological warfare. By controlling art, Akhenaten controlled the narrative. Temples, tombs, even private homes bore his image, not Amun's or Osiris's. Artisans, once free to carve traditional scenes, now followed strict orders. Depict the royal family, the Aten, and nothing else. Imagine being a sculptor, your hands calloused from years of crafting perfect gods, now forced to carve a pharaoh who looks like he stepped out of a sci-fi flick. The pain? Your craft's hijacked, your traditions erased, and one mistake could land you in exile. For nobles, it's worse. You commission these odd statues for your tomb, knowing they're a lie but too scared to say so. The irony? Akhenaten's truthful art, meant to reflect reality, was a distortion, a paranoid projection of his own insecurities. Ever had to follow a boss's bizarre vision just to keep your job? Drop your story in the comments. The paranoia behind this shows in the details. Akhenaten's officials policed art like hawks, ensuring no trace of the old style remained. Old reliefs were defaced, new ones standardized. Even private stelae, small devotional slabs, had to feature the royal family, not local gods. This wasn't just control, it was obsession, a fear that any deviation would undermine his divine image. But it backfired. The Amarna style, so distinct, made his reign a lightning rod for later erasure. Successors like Tutankhamun would try to wipe it out. The pain of survival? For artisans, it was betraying their craft. For the people, it was living in a world where the pharaoh's face was everywhere, watching, judging. The nightmare? A ruler so paranoid about his image that he reshaped reality, only to alienate those he ruled. Comment. What's the weirdest art or branding you've seen pushed by a leader? Let's paint a day in an artisan's life because the human cost tells the story. It's 1343 BCE, and you're a stonecutter in Amarna. Dawn's barely broken, but you're already at the quarry, chiseling blocks under a sun that feels like punishment. Your latest job? A relief of Akhenaten, his face stretched like taffy, his belly round, his daughters clinging to him. You've carved Horus before, all sharp lines and power. But this? It feels wrong. But you obey. Your family needs the grain ration. Dust clogs your lungs, your hands bleed, and the overseer's whip cracks if you pause. At the palace, you see the finished pieces, gleaming but strange, and hear whispers of discontent. Nobles grumble, but they pose for their own portraits, just as weird. Survival means swallowing your pride, carving the pharaoh's vision, and praying you don't slip up. The absurdity? You're building a legacy that feels like a fever dream, and you know it won't last. As we wrap part 3, let's reflect on the madness. Akhenaten's divinity and art obsessions weren't just quirks. They were paranoid bids to control everything. Gods, people, even history itself. The irony. His quest for immortality made him a target for oblivion, his image erased by those who followed. The pain? Living under a ruler who demanded worship while ignoring reality, from starving workers to crumbling borders. Survival meant playing along, but at what cost? Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll tackle his final obsession and the collapse of his dream. What do you think drove Akhenaten's paranoia to these heights? Ego, illness, or fear of betrayal? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep unraveling this pharaonic fiasco. Here we are, at the scorching, paranoia-fueled finale of Akhenaten's wild ride, where Egypt's most unhinged pharaoh turned his sun-worshipping obsession into a legacy of chaos. If you've stuck with us through the god-erasing, family-glorifying, and self-deifying madness of parts 1 through 3, you're tougher than a Nile crocodile. Missed those? Go back and brace yourself for the full absurdity of this desert debacle. We're wrapping up with Akhenaten's final obsession and the collapse of his sun-drenched dream, all dripping with irony, historical lunacy, and the gritty pain of surviving a world ruled by a man who thought he was the sun's best buddy. Survival in Amarna was a daily grind of dodging the pharaoh's whims, the desert's wrath, and an empire teetering on the edge. By the end, you'll be itching to comment. What's the craziest collapse you've seen, and could it top this pharaonic flop? Let's dive into the final act of this sandy nightmare. We left off with Akhenaten's obsessions with his own divinity and controlling art, turning Amarna into a propaganda machine where his weirdly elongated image was everywhere, and descent was a one-way ticket to the quarries. But as his reign stumbles into its later years, around 1340 BCE, roughly 13 years in, the cracks in his vision widen, and his paranoia hits fever pitch. Let's dive into number 1, his obsession with legacy and immortality. Akhenaten wasn't just content to rule Egypt or be a god. He wanted to etch his Aten-worshipping utopia into eternity, ensuring his name, his family, and his sun disk outlasted time itself. The irony? His desperate bid for immortality made him a target for erasure, his legacy crumbling faster than a mud brick hut in a flood. Survival meant buying into his eternal dream, even as it became a waking nightmare. Absurd, right? Let's unpack this final, fatal fixation. Picture Amarna in its twilight, a city of gleaming palaces and half-finished tombs. The Aten's rays still blazing, but the mood souring. Akhenaten, now in his 30s, is frail, possibly plagued by genetic ailments like Marfan syndrome, his long limbs and sunken chest a stark contrast to the god-king he claims to be. His hymns to the Aten, carved everywhere, promise eternal life under the sun, but the reality's grim. Nefertiti's gone from records, dead, exiled, or ruling as Smenkhkare. Nobody's sure. Daughter Mekhetaten's death, likely in childbirth, haunts reliefs. Her tomb a somber reminder of mortality. Yet Akhenaten doubles down, commissioning more monuments, more reliefs, more declarations that Amarna will stand forever. The pain of survival. For nobles, it's pouring wealth into a sinking ship. For workers, It's dying in the desert for a pharaoh who's lost touch. The nightmare. Knowing the empire's fraying, but chanting Aten forever to keep your head. Comment. If your leader's pet project was doomed, would you jump ship or ride it out? This obsession with legacy wasn't just about ego. It was paranoid desperation. Akhenaten knew his reforms had enemies. Priests, nobles, even foreign kings who saw Egypt's weakness. The Amarna letters, those dusty pleas from vassals, show an empire in decline. Hittites overrun outposts, trade routes falter, and allies defect. But Akhenaten's response? Build bigger, pray harder, and insist the Aten will fix it. Boundary stelae around Amarna proclaim the city's eternity, but they read like a man shouting into the void. He orders tombs carved into the cliffs, not just for himself, but for nobles, each one a mini shrine to the Aten. The absurdity. These tombs, meant to secure immortality, were barely finished. Some left empty, others looted soon after his death. Survival meant carving your own grave in a city you knew was temporary, a cruel joke on eternity. Ever worked on a project you knew would flop? Share your story below. The human cost was brutal, and it's where the pain of this era hits hardest. Imagine a laborer in Amarna, 1340 BCE. You're up before dawn, hauling limestone in heat that could bake bread. Your hands are raw, your back screams, and the overseer's whip is never far. The pharaoh's latest project, a massive Aten altar, needs more stone, but rations are dwindling, and the Nile's flood was weak this year. Your kids are hungry, your wife's sick, and you can't pray to Osiris for relief because it's forbidden. Archaeological finds paint a grim picture. Skeletons from Amarna show malnutrition, broken bones, and child burials, signs of a workforce pushed to the brink. The irony? Akhenaten's hymns sing of the Aten's life-giving rays, but those rays burned his people to dust. Survival meant enduring, because fleeing meant death in the desert. Comment. What's the hardest grind you've faced for someone else's dream? For the elite, the pain was different, but no less real. Nobles, dragged to Amarna, lived in villas but faced constant scrutiny. Akhenaten's paranoia meant loyalty tests, commission a relief praising the Aten, or risk suspicion. The royal court, once a hub of intrigue, became a cult, with officials like Ai and Horemheb, future pharaohs, navigating a tightrope. Praise the pharaoh too little, and you're out. Too much, and you're a sycophant. The nightmare. Watching Egypt's power fade while pretending Amarna's the future. The Amarna letters reveal vassals begging for gold or troops, but Akhenaten's focused on immortality. More statues, more hymns. The absurdity? He's so obsessed with outlasting death that he ignores the living, alienating the very people needed to sustain his legacy. It's like a CEO blowing the budget on a memoir while the company goes bust. Ever seen someone prioritize fame over function? Drop it in the comments. Let's zoom into a final ceremony because this is where the collapse feels visceral. It's 1338 BCE, near the end of Akhenaten's reign. The Aten shines, but Amarna's fading. Half-built structures crumble, food stores rot, and whispers of rebellion hum. Akhenaten, gaunt and weary, leads a festival in the great Aten temple. He raises emaciated arms, chanting hymns as priests stack offerings, bread, beer, flowers wilting in the heat. The crowd, nobles, scribes, soldiers, chants back, but their eyes dart nervously. Nefertiti's absence hangs heavy. Shmenkare, a shadowy figure, stands nearby. Maybe a son, maybe a desperate bid to secure the throne. The air's thick with incense, but it can't mask the stench of decay, literal and metaphorical. Outside, workers toil, their bodies breaking for a legacy that's already cracking. The pain, knowing this is the end, but smiling through it. The nightmare. You're trapped in a dying dream, and the pharaoh's too paranoid to see it. Ever been part of a failing project you couldn't escape? Tell me below. As Akhenaten's reign ends, around 1336 BCE, after 17 years, the collapse comes fast. He dies, possibly from illness, leaving a fractured empire. Smenkhkare rules briefly, then vanishes. Tutankhamun, likely Akhenaten's son, takes the throne as a boy, guided by advisors like Ai, who swiftly undo the Aten experiment. Amarna's abandoned, its temples left to the sand. The old gods, Amun, Osiris, return. Their names recarved as Akhenaten's are hacked away. His tombs, looted or unfinished. His statues, smashed or buried. The irony is brutal. His obsession with immortality ensured his erasure, his name a curse until 19th century archaeologists dug him up. The pain? For his people, it was years of suffering for a vision that failed. For Akhenaten, it was dying knowing his dream was doomed. The absurdity. Building a legacy on sand, literally and figuratively, and expecting it to last. Let's reflect on the fallout, because this is where the human condition shines through. Akhenaten's paranoia, fueled by power, illness, or fear, drove him to rewrite gods, art, and history, but it cost him everything. His people endured. Laborers died in quarries, nobles lost status, and his family faced tragedy, because survival meant obedience. The empire survived too, but weaker. Its borders shrunk, its coffers drained. The Amarna letters show a world moving on without Egypt, vassals turning to rivals like the Hittites. The sarcastic twist? Akhenaten's quest for eternity made him a footnote, his city a ruin, his god forgotten until modern times. It's a lesson in hubris. Even gods can't outrun reality. Comment: what's the biggest legacy flop you've seen, and does it beat Akhenaten's? As we close, let's paint a final day in Amarna, 1336 BCE. You're a scribe, your papyrus stained with sweat. The city's quiet, the Aten's rays harsh but hollow. Akhenaten's gone, maybe dead, maybe dying. You write his last hymn, but rumors swirl. Tutankhamun's coming, Amun's priests are back. Your neighbor, a sculptor, packs his tools, muttering about Thebes. The palace feels empty, its gold tarnished, its altars abandoned. Survival now means forgetting the Aten, relearning old prayers, and hoping the new regime forgives your loyalty to a failed pharaoh. The pain? Years of toil for nothing. The absurdity? A city built to last forever, left to crumble in a decade. If this saga's left you reeling, hit like and subscribe for more historical madness. Comment: could you survive Akhenaten's Amarna? What's the worst obsession-driven disaster you've witnessed? Let's keep this pharaonic fiasco alive in the comments.